A story about love, madness, and the things we cannot save. Is saying some families don't fall apart because of betrayal or poverty or broken promises. They fall apart because of something that lives inside the blood, quiet, patient, waiting. And when it finally wakes up, it doesn't knock, it kicks the door down. This is my story, and I wish with everything I have left that it wasn't. If the story reaches you wherever you are in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far these words have traveled, like if you stayed until the end. I made this for every person who has ever loved someone they couldn't save. Part 1. The life we built before it burned. I want to tell you about the night everything felt perfect, because that's the night I should have known something was coming. It was a Saturday in late October, the kind of night where the air smells like wood smoke and dead leaves, where the temperature drops just enough that you want to pull a blanket over your shoulders and stay exactly where you are. Daniel had made his mother's chili, too spicy, as always, and Adrian had eaten 2 bowls without complaining, which was unusual for a 9-year-old who normally negotiated every vegetable like a small attorney. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, and the light above us was warm and gold, and Daniel had his hand on mine, and Adrian was telling us something about black holes with that particular intensity he got when he discovered something new. "Mom," he said very seriously, his dark eyes wide, "did you know that if you fell into a black hole, time would slow down for you but speed up for everyone else? So to them, you'd disappear in a second, but for you, it would take forever." Daniel looked at me over Adrian's head and smiled. That quiet, private smile that meant our kid is something else, isn't he? "That sounds lonely," I said. Adrian thought about it. "Yeah," he said, "but at least you'd have forever to figure things out." I didn't think much about those words then. Kids say things. They repeat facts from YouTube videos and library books and make them sound profound. But sitting here now, decades later, I think about that conversation more than almost any other. Because that's exactly what happened to us. The rest of the world moved on. Fast, clean, forward. And we got stuck in the slow time, in the forever. This is the story of how we fell in. Where I come from, I grew up in Delwood, New Mexico, a town so small it doesn't even show up correctly on most maps. It sits about 40 miles from the Texas border, surrounded by flat brown land and oil rigs and a gas station that doubled as the only grocery store for 12 miles. The kind of place where everyone knows your name and knows your grandmother's name and knows the story about your uncle who got arrested in 1987 and never quite let him forget it. My family was not rich. My father, Hector Cruz, worked construction, roofing mostly, and came home every evening with dust on his boots and an ache in his lower back. He never complained about. My mother, Rosario, cleaned houses in the mornings and ran a small tamale operation out of our kitchen on weekends. They were good people, hard-working, private, deeply loyal to each other. The kind of couple who didn't show affection in big dramatic gestures, but in small constant ones. My father always made sure my mother's coffee cup was full. My mother always ironed his shirts even when she was exhausted. That was love in our house. Quiet and reliable, like a well that never ran dry. We were happy, genuinely. Not the Instagram version of happy, not the performance, actually happy in the ordinary way that doesn't make for interesting stories until something comes along and breaks it. The only shadow in our family was something we didn't talk about directly. It lived in the whispers, the way my grandmother would sometimes look at old photographs and go quiet for too long. The way my mother changed the subject when certain relatives came up in conversation. The way nobody ever fully explained why my great-uncle Ernesto had to be sent away when he was 32, or why his son had done the same thing 15 years later. I was 17 when I finally pushed hard enough to get an answer. "Mental illness," my mother said, not looking at me, her hands busy folding laundry. "It runs in the family. On my father's side, it skips sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. What kind of mental illness? She pressed her lips together. The kind that changes a person. That was all I got. The kind that changes a person. As if I could file that away somewhere, label it, put it on a shelf, and move on with my life. Which, because I was 17 and the world was big and bright and full of other things to think about, I did. I filed it away. I moved on. I wish I hadn't. I met Daniel Hayes at a community college in Albuquerque when I was 22. He was sitting at the table next to mine in the library, surrounded by accounting textbooks, wearing a flannel shirt with a small hole in the elbow that he tried to fix with iron-on fabric and failed badly. He looked up when I sat down and said, "Sorry if I'm taking up too much table space," which was both unnecessary and oddly endearing. He wasn't tall or particularly striking in any way that would make you stop and stare. Medium height, brown hair that never quite cooperated with whatever he was trying to do to it. Glasses he only wore when he was reading, but was too vain to admit he needed full time. He had a kind face. That's the best way I can describe it. The kind of face that made you feel like whatever you said next wasn't going to be used against you. We talked for 3 hours that first night. About school, about where we'd grown up. He was from a small town in northern New Mexico, so we understood the particular grammar of that kind of life, about what we wanted. He was studying accounting because his father had been an accountant and because numbers made sense to him in a way other things didn't. Numbers don't lie, he told me. They don't change their story based on who's asking. I thought that was the nerdiest and most sincere thing I'd ever heard. By the end of that first semester, I knew I wanted to be with him. Not because he was exciting or mysterious. He wasn't, not even a little. He was steady. In a family that had always carried the hum of unspoken fear, steady was the most intoxicating thing I could imagine. We dated for 2 years. We were good at it, not perfect. We had our arguments. We had periods where we weren't sure we were heading in the same direction. But we always came back to the same conclusion, which was that we were better together than apart. He proposed on a Tuesday, which sounds unromantic, but it wasn't. He made dinner, pasta with sauce from a jar because he couldn't cook. And he said very simply, "I want to do the boring stuff with you, the Tuesday stuff, the nothing happening stuff. I want all of it." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married in my parents' backyard in June, small and simple, maybe 40 people. My mother's tamales, Daniel's father's bad jokes. It wasn't a fairy tale wedding. The cake tilted slightly to the left. My cousin spilled red wine on her dress and cried about it in the bathroom for 20 minutes. The microphone cut out during Daniel's vows, and he had to say the last part into the silence, just to me, which turned out to be the best part of the whole evening. That was us, always finding the best part in the imperfection. Say, Adrian, our son was born 3 years into our marriage on a February morning, so cold the pipes in our apartment nearly froze overnight. I'd been in labor for 11 hours. Daniel had been awake for all of them, holding my hand, except for the one moment he slipped out to get a vending machine sandwich and came back with the wrong kind, and apologized for 7 minutes straight, which almost made me laugh in between contractions. Adrian Daniel Hayes came into the world at 6:47 a.m., screaming with what the nurse cheerfully called real good lungs. And the first thing Daniel said when they put him in his arms was, "Hey man, we've been waiting for you." He was a beautiful baby, dark hair like mine, Daniel's jaw, this particular alertness in his eyes that made the pediatrician comment on it at his very first checkup. "He's tracking well," she said, which is the medical way of saying this child is already paying attention to everything, and he was. From the very beginning, Adrian paid attention to everything. By 18 months, he had a vocabulary that startled strangers. By 3, he was asking questions that didn't have easy answers. Why does ice melt? Why do people die? Why is the sky a different color right before dark than it is at noon? By 5, he was reading chapter books on his own and correcting the math on game show reruns with an expression of mild exasperation. It would have been exhausting if it wasn't so astonishing. I remember his kindergarten teacher calling me in for a conference and feeling that spark of maternal dread. What did he do? What's wrong? And then she said, "Mrs. Hayes, I've been teaching for 18 years. Adrian is the most intellectually curious child I've ever had in my classroom. I just wanted you to know." I called Daniel from the parking lot. He said, "We made a really good kid. We really had. Hasn't Samna." The years that felt like a promise. The decade that followed Adrian's birth was the best of my life. I'm not romanticizing it. I know that's what people do when something terrible follows. They polish up the good years until they shine, until they look like something they maybe weren't. But I genuinely believe that decade was good in all the ordinary ways that add up to something extraordinary. We saved enough money to buy a small house on the east side of Albuquerque. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with a peach tree that produced fruit exactly once before giving up entirely. A kitchen that needed new countertops we kept saying we'd replace and never did. Daniel's accounting practice had grown from a solo operation out of our 2nd bedroom into a small office with 2 employees. I'd gone back to school, gotten my nursing license, started working at a pediatric clinic 4 days a week. We weren't wealthy, we were comfortable. There's a difference. Comfortable means you stop holding your breath every time a bill arrives. Comfortable means the occasional dinner out without calculating what you have to skip next week. Comfortable means your kid can do baseball camp in the summer and you can give him the $20 for the school book fare without feeling sick about it afterward. It was enough. It was more than enough. Adrian thrived in a way that felt almost surreal. He was the kid who was good at everything, but not in the obnoxious way, not the kind of gifted that made other parents quietly hate you. He was kind about it, generous. He tutored classmates without being asked. He spent a whole summer teaching himself basic coding from library books, and then instead of showing off about it, he built a simple scheduling program for my mother's tamale business because she was still doing everything on paper. She cried when he showed her. He was 10. His teachers loved him. The neighbors loved him. He had a best friend, Marcus, who'd been next door since 2nd grade and who was his opposite in every way. Loud where Adrian was quiet, scattered where Adrian was organized. And they were the kind of friends who seemed to complete some equation neither of them could solve alone. I used to watch him sometimes, sitting at the kitchen table with his homework spread around him, headphones in, entirely absorbed, and I would feel something I can only describe as a kind of terrified gratitude. Like the happiness was so large it scared me. Like somewhere in my chest, I was always slightly waiting for the cost. My mother used to say, "Cuando la vida se ve demasiado bien, es porque algo se está cobrando." When life looks too good, it's because something is collecting. I thought she was being superstitious. Eeg. The first cracks. It started so small, so easily explained. Adrian was 14 when the sleep problems began. Not dramatic insomnia, just a shift. He started staying up later, past midnight, then past 1, then past 2. We told ourselves it was teenagers. Every parent we knew said the same thing. They flip nocturnal, it's developmental, it passes. We set rules about phones and screens and got into the usual arguments about them. He rolled his eyes the way 14-year-olds do and pushed back and occasionally complied, and it felt like normal friction. What was less easy to explain was the thinking. Adrian had always been a focused kid, but there's focused and there's something else. That fall, he became obsessed. That's the only word for it, obsessed. With a history project on ancient civilizations, which was fine. It was a school project, but the obsession didn't stop when the project was turned in. He kept going, kept reading, kept filling notebooks with connections he was finding between ancient cultures, between symbols, between patterns that he said kept repeating across thousands of years. "Mom, look at this," he'd say, spreading pages across the kitchen table. "Look at how the same geometric shapes appear in completely isolated civilizations. Egypt, the Mayans, the Indus Valley. They had no contact with each other. How is that possible? It's a coincidence, Daniel said once, not unkindly, just reasonably. Adrian looked at him the way you look at someone who has said something deeply, almost offensively incorrect. Coincidence is just a pattern we haven't understood yet, he said. At the time, Daniel and I exchanged a look that meant, well, he's not wrong, is he? We thought we were watching a gifted kid find his passion. We thought we were seeing the beginning of something great. We were watching the beginning of something else entirely. What normal looks like when it's ending, here's the thing about the way it happens. And I'm telling you this not because I want sympathy, but because I want you to understand. Because if someone had told me this when Adrian was 14, I might have seen it sooner. I might have moved faster. And one word said in time can sometimes change everything. The way it happens is it looks like personality. Every symptom presents itself as a trait. The sleeplessness looks like ambition. The obsessive thinking looks like intellectual passion. The emotional distance looks like teenage moodiness. The irritability looks like stress. The sensitivity to criticism looks like artistic temperament. Every piece of the picture looks individually like something you can name and explain and reassure yourself about. It's only when you step back far enough to see the whole picture that you realize what you've been looking at. We didn't step back far enough. Not for a long time. By 15, Adrian had pulled away from Marcus. Not dramatically, no fight, no falling out, just a slow recession. He stopped going to Marcus's house on weekends, stopped returning texts as quickly. When Marcus came by, Adrian was pleasant enough but distracted, like he was only partially in the room. Marcus stopped coming by as often, then not at all. We tried to talk to Adrian about it. He said he was fine, that he and Marcus just had different interests now, that it was natural for friendships to evolve, which was true and reasonable and something any 15-year-old might say. So we let it go. He started spending his evenings alone in his room. Not gaming, not the normal teenage screen time we expected. Writing, reading, covering the walls, and I mean the actual walls. He asked permission first. I'll give him that. Imprinted pages, articles, diagrams, things he'd found that connected to each other in ways he kept trying to explain to us. It's research, he said. For what? Daniel asked. Adrian paused in a way that felt just slightly too long. I'm working on a theory, he said. What theory? He looked at his father with an expression I didn't have a word for then. Now I would call it guardedness. The look of someone who has decided you can't be fully trusted with something important. It's not ready yet, he said, that night after Adrian had gone to bed. Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were done and the house was quiet. Is he okay? Daniel asked. I don't know, I said. Is this the smart kid thing? Is this what it looks like when... I don't know, I said again. We sat there in the quiet. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked twice and went silent. The refrigerator hummed. The peach tree in the backyard, still stubbornly refusing to fruit again, threw branch shadows against the kitchen window. I'll make an appointment with his doctor, I said finally. Just a checkup, just to talk. Okay, Daniel said, and then after a moment, he's going to be fine, Eleanor. He believed it. That was the worst part. He genuinely believed it, and because I loved him, and because I was afraid, I let myself believe it too. The doctor, the first time doctor. Anand Mehta had been Adrian's pediatrician since he was 4. He was a calm man, careful with his words, the kind of doctor who made you feel heard even when he wasn't telling you anything new. He saw Adrian alone for 30 minutes, then called us in. Adrian is physically healthy, and he said. No concerns there. He paused. He told me he's been having some trouble sleeping, some difficulty concentrating on things that aren't his. He called them his projects. He's always been focused, I said, maybe overly focused, but tell me about the family history, Dr. Mehta said. Something cold moved through me. Not because of the question. It was a reasonable question. He was our family doctor. He knew our histories. But because of the way he asked it, very carefully, like he was asking about a diagnosis he already suspected. There's some history of mental illness, I said. On my mother's side, it's vague. Nobody ever talked about it directly. What type of mental illness do you know? No, I paused. My mother said it was the kind that changes a person. Dr. Mehta wrote something in his notes. I'd like to refer Adrian to a colleague of mine, a psychiatrist, just for an evaluation, not because I'm diagnosing anything, and I'm not, but because I'd like a professional opinion on what we're seeing. I looked at Daniel. He was very still. Is it serious? Daniel asked. I think it's worth taking seriously, Dr. Mehta said, which is a different answer. And he knew it, and we knew it. We drove home mostly in silence. Adrian was in the back seat, earbuds in, looking out the window at the desert scrub going past in the gold October light. Hey, I said, turning to look at him at a red light. How are you feeling? He pulled one earbud out. Fine, he said. And then, looking at me with those dark, sharp, entirely present eyes, Mom, why are you worried? I'm not worried, I lied. He put the earbud back in. He looked back out the window. And in the specific way that a lie will echo back at you for years, I heard myself say those words for a long time afterward. Long after the truth had made them impossible. See, what the house held that winter, something shifted in the quality of our home. I've thought about how to describe it because it wasn't anything I could point to directly. It wasn't a fight or a crisis or a specific incident. It was more like a pressure change, the kind you feel in your ears before a storm, subtle and impossible to locate, something that makes the air feel different without changing what you can see. Adrian became quieter, not withdrawn exactly. He still came to dinner, still answered questions, still occasionally made the dry, precise jokes that had always been his. But there was something behind his eyes that was different, a distance that hadn't been there before, like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. The notebooks multiplied. He went through them at a rate I couldn't track. Spiral notebooks, composition books, even a leather journal Daniel had given him for his birthday. He never showed us what was in them anymore. When I asked once, casually, I tried to keep it casual, he said, it's private, in a tone that didn't invite follow-up. He started locking his bedroom door. This sounds like nothing. Teenagers lock their doors. But Adrian had never been the kind of teenager who locked his door. He'd always been, for all his intensity, surprisingly open with us. Not about everything, not in the way little kids are, but accessible, reachable. The locked door felt like a wall going up in a house that didn't have walls. The psychiatrist referral took 6 weeks to come through, 6 weeks in which the pressure kept building in ways I couldn't name to anyone, even to Daniel, because every time I tried to say it out loud, it sounded like nothing. He locks his door, he fills notebooks, he sleeps at strange hours, he's quiet at dinner. What mother doesn't have a quiet teenager? What mother hasn't stood in a hallway outside a closed door and tried to decode the silence on the other side? One night, I was up at 3 a.m., I'd woken to use the bathroom, and I saw the light under Adrian's door. I stopped. I stood there in the dark hallway listening, and from inside his room I could hear him, not on the phone, not watching something, just talking, low and continuous, like he was delivering something he'd memorized, like he was practicing a speech or running through something he needed to get exactly right. I stood there for maybe 2 full minutes, my hand not quite touching his door. Then I went back to bed. I told Daniel in the morning. He was quiet for a long time. Kids talk to themselves, he said finally. When they're working through something, they talk out loud. I used to do that. At 3 in the morning, he didn't have an answer for that. The appointment. The psychiatrist's name was Dr. Sylvia Crane. She had an office in Midtown Albuquerque that was designed to be neutral and comfortable. Plants, a couch, art that was specifically chosen to not mean anything. She was in her mid-50s, silver-haired, with the kind of composed expression that could mean either she'd heard everything or she was giving nothing away, probably both. She met with Adrian alone for 90 minutes. Then she met with Daniel and me without him. She sat across from us with a legal pad and a pen she kept clicking, once, twice, a small nervous habit that made her seem more human than the office did. Adrian is extremely intelligent, she said. I think you know that. He's also very articulate about his own experience, which is actually somewhat unusual and will serve him well. But, Daniel said, she looked at him, he's experiencing some things that concern me. He's described a persistent sense that his thoughts are, his word was, louder than they used to be, that they feel intrusive, that he has difficulty distinguishing sometimes between a thought he's having and something he's heard. My hands were in my lap. I pressed them together hard. He also described what sounds like perceptual disturbances around, she continued. Things he's seen or heard that he's aware may not be real, but that feel very real to him. He said he's been seeing shapes in his peripheral vision, at night mostly. He knows they're not real. He's been rational enough to understand they're not real, but they frighten him. Daniel made a sound, something small and involuntary. He told you this? I asked. He's never said anything to us. He said he didn't want to worry you. She paused. He said, and I'm sharing this because I think it matters, he said, my parents have built a good life and I don't want to break it. The room went very quiet. I don't want to break it. My 16-year-old son had been carrying this alone in the dark, in his locked room at 3 a.m, talking himself through the shapes at the edges of his vision. And he had decided that the most important thing was not to break what we had built. The love of that and the tragedy of it hit me at the same time, so I couldn't tell them apart. What does this mean, Daniel asked. His voice was carefully controlled. What is this? Dr. Crane set down her pen. She looked at us both with that composed, serious expression. I don't want to put a label on anything after one session, she said. What I can tell you is that Adrian is showing early signs of a psychotic process. What that means, what form it takes, how it develops. Those are things we determine over time, with observation, with history. There are several possibilities, some more serious than others. Schizophrenia, I heard myself say, the word I'd been not saying for weeks. She didn't flinch. It's on the differential. There are others. Bipolar disorder with psychotic features. A few others we'd want to rule out, but yes, it's something we need to take seriously. Daniel reached over and took my hand. His fingers were cold. What do we do? I asked. We start meeting regularly. We monitor. We discuss whether medication is appropriate at this stage. And, she paused, you go home and you have a conversation with your son. Not about diagnosis. Not about what this might be. Just about the fact that you see him. That you know he's been scared and that you're not going anywhere. We drove home in the kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind that's full. The conversation, we found him in the kitchen eating cereal. This ordinary after-school image of him in his socks and a hoodie that was 2 sizes too big, bowl of cereal, a book open beside it. And something about the normalness of it made my chest ache so hard I had to stop in the doorway for a moment. He looked up. He looked at our faces. He put down his spoon. She told you, he said. Some of it, I said. He was quiet. He looked down at his bowl. He pushed a piece of cereal in a slow circle with his spoon. I'm not crazy, he said. Not defensive, just factual, careful. I know that, I said. I crossed the kitchen and sat down across from him. Daniel sat beside me. Adrian, Daniel said, why didn't you tell us? He looked at his father. That expression again. Not quite guardedness, something more complicated than that. Something that looked like love and grief mixed together. Because you've worked so hard, he said. You've worked so hard for all of this. The house, the business, everything. And it's good. You made something good. I didn't want to be the thing that he stopped, swallowed. I didn't want to cost you something. I had to press my lips together very hard. Listen to me, I said. You could never cost us anything we're not willing to pay. Do you understand that? There is no version of this where we walk away. There is no version of this where you are alone. He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were bright. The shapes, he said finally. You know about the shapes? Yes. They're more frequent. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. He'd put them flat on the table, and I could see his fingers pressing down. I've been trying to track them in the notebooks. When they come, how long they last, what triggers them. I thought if I understood the pattern. Adrian, I reached across and covered his hands with mine. You don't have to figure this out alone. He looked down at our hands. His jaw moved. I'm scared, he said, just like that, plain and quiet, like a confession he'd been holding for months. I'm really scared, Mom. I know, I said. We're scared too, and that's okay. We're going to be scared together. I don't know if that was the right thing to say. I don't know if there was a right thing. But he nodded, and he didn't pull his hands away, and for a few minutes the three of us just sat there in the kitchen, with the afternoon light coming in through the window above the sink, in the house we'd built, in the life that was starting to shift underneath us in ways none of us could fully see yet. The peach tree outside threw its shadow across the kitchen floor. I remember thinking, we can get through this. I still believe that sentence. I just no longer believe it means what I thought it meant.
Yep.
What we didn't know, that night after Adrian had gone to bed, Daniel and I sat on the back porch in the cold. He had his arm around me. I had my head against his shoulder. The sky over Albuquerque was the color of an old bruise, purple and orange and very far away. Tell me what you know, and he said, about the family history. So I told him everything my mother had told me, which wasn't much. Great Uncle Ernesto, his son. The whispered word schizophrenia that I'd once heard my grandmother say, and then walk back immediately as if she could retract it. The phrase my mother had used, the kind that changes a person. Daniel was quiet for a long time, then he said, we fight it. Daniel, I mean it, whatever it is. We get him the best help we can find. We don't let him believe for 1 second that this is a sentence, because it isn't. People live with this. People manage it. I know, I said. People have whole, full lives. I know, I said again. I know. He pulled me closer. I could feel his heartbeat, steady, reliable, that same steady thing that had always been the best thing about him. He said he didn't want to break what we built, Daniel said after a while. Yeah, but he doesn't get it, does he? He is what we built. I closed my eyes. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, a car started up and drove away. The sound faded. The night settled back into itself. He is what we built, yes. And we were about to learn what it costs, what it really costs to fight for something you love. Not just the money, not just the time, though there would be so much of both, but the daily willingness to look at something that frightens you and choose not to look away, over and over. Even when looking away would be so much easier, even when everything in you says, this is too much, this is more than I can hold. You hold it anyway, or you try. That night, I thought we could. I thought we were strong enough. I thought what we had, what Daniel and I had built together, the steadiness, the Tuesday love, the small reliable things, I thought that was enough of a foundation to hold anything. I didn't know yet what was coming. I didn't know how much weight the ground beneath us would be asked to bear. In the morning, Adrian came downstairs and made himself toast. He sat at the table with a new notebook, still unopened, turning it over in his hands like he was deciding something. Then he opened it to the first page. He picked up a pen, and for the first time in months he looked up at me and said, "What's for breakfast, Mom?" Just like that, easy and ordinary, like a window that had been stuck had finally come open a little. I made eggs. We ate together. Daniel was late for a client meeting and left with his tie still crooked, and Adrian reached out and straightened it without being asked. It was such a small thing. God, it was such a small thing, but I held on to it for years. End of part 1. Part hãy lưu ý, viết 5.500 đến 6.000 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kết cầu leo thẳng liên tục, không dừng ở một cú sốc duy nhất, mỗi đoạn lại tăng mức độ xung đột. Đây là kiểu escalation storytelling để giữ người xem ở lại. Nhân vật phân cực rất rõ, thông điệp đạo đức mạnh. Truyện không chỉ kể drama mà còn đẩy ra bài học. Tình yêu không thể mua bằng tiền, phải đặt ranh giới với gia đình độc hại. Người lớn tuổi có quyền bảo vệ tài sản và phẩm giá. Nên nó mang màu của moral lesson story. Liên tục có cliffhanger mini. Ngôi kể thứ nhất rất cảm xúc. Nhân vật tôi kể lại toàn bộ trải nghiệm theo kiểu thú nhận hồi tưởng rất gần với người nghe. Mục tiêu là kéo khán giả nhập vai vào nỗi đau và sự phản bội. Giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lãng mạn, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Việt như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI, cố gắng nghe sảng. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả quả mượt mà và hoàn hảo. Kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong một tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chỉ dẫn bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 15. To part 2. The boy who started disappearing. The exact morning were the last ordinary breakfast we had for a long time. I don't mean that dramatically. I mean it as fact. After that day, after the conversation with Dr. Crane, after Adrian's quiet confession at the kitchen table, we entered a period that I can only describe as managed uncertainty. Every morning felt like standing at the edge of something you couldn't see the bottom of, trying to decide if today was the day you'd fall. Some days you didn't fall, some days you almost did. And the difference between those two kinds of days wasn't anything you could control, which was the part that broke you slowly. The way water breaks stone, not by force, but by persistence. Dr. Crane began seeing Adrian twice a week. He went without argument, which surprised us. I had braced for resistance, for the teenage pride that refuses to need help. But Adrian approached therapy the same way he approached everything, with a kind of serious, methodical engagement that would have been reassuring if the reason for it wasn't so frightening. He came home from sessions quiet, but not closed off. He answered when we asked how it went. He said it was useful, which was Adrian's highest praise for anything that wasn't mathematics. For a few months, things stabilized. The shapes in his peripheral vision didn't disappear, but they became, his word, predictable. He learned to note them without responding to them. He was sleeping, not well, but better. He was back at school, maintaining grades that were still extraordinary, even through everything, and his teachers, the ones who knew, the ones we'd quietly informed, reported nothing concerning. Daniel and I exhaled, not completely, but enough to sleep most nights. That exhale, I would later understand, was a mistake, not because we were wrong to feel hope. Hope is never the mistake. The mistake was thinking that stability meant progress, that because the water had stopped rising, it was receding. It wasn't receding, it was gathering itself. The first real sign that something had changed came on a Tuesday in March, when Adrian was 16 and a half. He came home from school and went straight to his room without speaking, which wasn't entirely unusual. But something in his posture was, something in the way he moved through the house, quick, angled slightly away from doorways, the way you move through a space you're not sure is safe. I was making dinner. I almost called after him. I turned back to the stove instead. An hour later, I knocked on his door. Adrian? Silence. Adrian, dinner's almost ready. A pause. Then, okay. He came down. He sat at the table. He ate, not much, but he ate. He was in that particular stillness, the kind that isn't calm, the kind that's the opposite of calm, the kind that is effort. He was working very hard to appear normal. How was school, Daniel asked. Fine. Did you have that history test today? Yeah. How'd it go? Fine. Daniel caught my eye across the table. Fine 3 times in a row, with that particular flatness. We both knew the language by now. We both knew what fine meant when it sounded like that. After dinner, Adrian helped clear the plate. He always helped, even when he was struggling. This was one of the things about him that never left, this fundamental courtesy. And then he stopped at the entrance to the kitchen with a plate in his hand and said, without turning around, "There was a kid at school today. We waited. He said some things." He put the plate in the sink, still not turning around. About me. He said, he told some people that I was... He stopped. That I was the crazy cruise kid. The words landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a heart. Who said that? Daniel said. His voice had gone very controlled. It doesn't matter. Adrian, it doesn't matter who said it. Now he turned around. His face was composed in that way that required tremendous effort to maintain. People talk. People find out things. I don't know how he knew, but he knew I was seeing a psychiatrist, and he stopped again, swallowed. People at school look at me differently now. I can tell. Are you sure? I asked. I hated myself for asking it even as I said it. The instinct to minimize, to soften, to find the other explanation. He looked at me. Mom, I have been watching people's faces my entire life. Yes, I'm sure. The silence that followed was very full. I'll call the school, Daniel said. Please don't. Adrian, please. His voice cracked just slightly, just for a second, and then he had it back. It'll make it worse. I know how to handle it. I just needed to say it to someone. He paused. I just needed you to know. Okay, I said, we know. He nodded. He went back upstairs, and Daniel and I stood in the kitchen listening to the sound of his door. Not locking this time, just closing. And neither of us spoke because there was nothing to say that would make it smaller than it was. Our son was being reduced to a word at school. Crazy. The worst, cheapest, most weaponized word for something that was so much more complicated and so much more human than that word could ever hold. That night I called my mother. I told her about Adrian. All of it. The diagnosis trajectory, the therapy, what had happened at school. She was quiet on the phone for a long time after I finished. The kind of quiet that means someone is deciding how much of the truth to give you. Mama, I said, tell me about Ernesto. Another pause. Your great-uncle Ernesto, she said finally, was the smartest person I ever knew as a child. He read everything, remembered everything, could do calculations in his head that took other people paper and pencil and still got them wrong. She paused. He started changing when he was about 17. The family said he was working too hard. Then they said he was sleeping too much. Then they said he was talking to himself. By the time they understood what was happening, he was already... She stopped. He was already somewhere else, inside himself. They couldn't reach him. Was he ever diagnosed? Schizophrenia, she said. The word came out quietly, like she'd been holding it in her mouth for years. His son, your cousin, Miguel's father, he had it too. Slightly different, less severe, they said, though I'm not sure what less severe means when you watch someone lose their way. Why didn't you tell me more of this? When I was younger, when I was pregnant, I heard her exhale, because I prayed it had skipped, because I didn't want to put that fear in you. Because she stopped. Because I was a coward, Elena. I was afraid of the thing, and so I didn't name it, and I know now that was wrong. I'm sorry. There were things I wanted to say to that, a few of them unkind, but she was old and she was scared, and she was my mother, and the unkind things would keep. Tell me everything you know, I said instead. Everything. No more protecting me. And she did. For almost an hour, she told me the real history of my family. The men who had gone quietly or not so quietly, of course. The women who had held things together with both hands while pretending nothing was happening. The generations of silence that had let this thing move through us unnamed and therefore unfought. She told me everything she knew, which wasn't everything, which was the hardest part. The gaps in the knowledge where the shame had eaten the information. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table alone and I let myself cry. Not the composed, private kind, the ugly kind, the kind that comes from somewhere below the chest. I cried for Adrian and I cried for Ernesto and I cried for everyone who had carried this without a name for it. And then I dried my face, drank a glass of water and went to bed. Because tomorrow was another day and Adrian had an appointment with Dr. Crane and there were things to do and the crying was done and the doing had to start again. That's the rhythm nobody tells you about, the cry, the water, the bed, the morning, the doing. Over and over, that's what surviving something looks like from the inside. It doesn't look like strength. It looks like repetition. Those next months moved in a pattern that felt almost routine, which I know sounds impossible. How does crisis become routine? But it does, because human beings are adaptive in ways that would be miraculous if they weren't so often just desperately necessary. We built structures. Dr. Crane twice a week. A mild medication she started Adrian on at 16 and a half, carefully monitored, adjusting the dosage over weeks the way you tune an instrument by fractions. A consistent sleep schedule we all three of us, committed to, because Dr. Crane said that sleep disruption was one of the most reliable triggers, and so we made sleep a family project, which sounds almost funny until you understand how serious we were about it. Adrian adapted, not gracefully. There was nothing graceful about it, let's be clear. The medication made him tired in a way that frustrated him viscerally. This boy who had always been sharp and quick and several steps ahead of everyone in the room, suddenly moving through his days with a heaviness he couldn't stand. He complained about it. He said it felt like thinking through cotton. He said it felt like losing the part of himself that was the best part. And I didn't have a good answer for that because he wasn't entirely wrong. There was a cost to the medication. There always is. The question is always whether the cost is worth what you're buying, and that question doesn't have a clean answer. It only has the best available answer on any given day. I feel slower, he told me one evening. He was sitting on the couch with his legs folded under him, a book open in his lap that he hadn't looked at in 20 minutes. Like, you know how video gets compressed? The quality drops? It feels like that. I know, I said. I hate it. I know you do. Is this what it's going to be forever? Because if this is the trade, then I need to... He stopped, looked at me. I need to know if this is worth it. We're still figuring out the right dosage, as I said. This isn't permanent. This is where we start. And if we can't find one that works, I held his gaze, then we find a different medication, and then another if we need to. Adrian, this is medicine. It takes time to get right. You don't give up after the first try. He looked away. Easy for you to say. You think I don't know that? He looked back, surprised maybe by the edge in my voice. You think this is easy to watch? I said, not angry, just honest. You think sitting here watching you lose something you love about yourself is comfortable for me? I'm your mother. Your pain is my pain. But I need you to stay in the fight. I need you to give this a chance to work before you decide it isn't worth it. Can you do that? A long beat, then, yeah, he said, quiet. Yeah, I can do that. We adjusted, we kept going. By 17, the dosage had been calibrated to something that managed the worst of the symptoms without the cotton head effect, and Adrian began to re-emerge. Tentative, slightly different in ways that were hard to quantify, but still recognizably himself. He started painting. This surprised all of us, including him. Adrian had never shown much interest in art. His gifts had always been language and mathematics and the intersection of those two things. But Dr. Crane had suggested something creative, something that didn't require the kind of linear, logical processing that had always been his default, something that might give the parts of his mind that weren't playing by the usual rules a different kind of outlet. And one afternoon he found an old set of acrylic paints at a garage sale and came home with them. And the next day he came home from school and painted for 3 hours straight. And what he produced wasn't polished or technically impressive, but it was alive in a way that made you stop and look. Dark things, abstract, dense, layered, colors that bled into each other in ways that shouldn't have worked and did. Daniel stood in front of the first one for a long time without speaking. "This is what it looks like," Adrian said from behind him. What looks like?" "Inside," he paused, "when it gets loud." Daniel turned around. His eyes were wet. He looked at our son for a long moment. "It's incredible, Hamilton," he said, and then simply, "Thank you for showing me." Adrian shrugged in the way that meant he was moved but would not admit it. "Don't make it weird, Dad." Daniel laughed. I laughed. Even Adrian almost smiled. Those were the moments that kept us alive, the almost smiles, the don't make it weird, the specific texture of our particular family still present underneath all the weight, still there, still findable if you knew where to look. We found it as often as we could. We held on to it with both hands. But the thing about a degenerative process, and I want to be careful here because I'm not a doctor and I'm not diagnosing from memory. The thing about whatever was happening inside Adrian's mind was that it didn't have respect for the good periods. It didn't step back because he was trying. It didn't give him time because we were all working so hard. It moved according to its own schedule, underground, in ways that weren't visible until they were, and then they were very visible all at once. The paranoia started when he was 17 and a half, quietly at first, a heightened sensitivity to being watched, to conversations that stopped when he entered a room, to people who seemed to be looking at him just slightly too long. He mentioned it to Dr. Crane. She monitored it. She adjusted his medication. It helped some, not enough. By 18, he had developed what Dr. Crane carefully called ideas of reference, a pattern of finding personal meaning in things that were unconnected to him. A news broadcast, a particular sequence of numbers on a license plate, a song that came on the radio at a moment he was thinking about something specific. He knew on a rational level that these were coincidences. He told us he knew. But knowing something intellectually and being free of it are two entirely different things. And the gap between those two states was where Adrian lived, and it was not a comfortable place to live. The summer he turned 18 was the summer the arguments started. They began over small things. They almost always do. A disagreement about his medication schedule. A conversation about whether he was well enough to apply for college. A discussion about the notebooks which had started again. The dense handwritten pages that we weren't allowed to see, that he carried with him everywhere now, that he referred to with a possessiveness that made my stomach tighten every time. "You're monitoring me," he said one evening at dinner, out of nowhere, in the middle of a meal that had been perfectly calm. He put his fork down. "Both of you. You think I don't notice, but I do." Daniel set his own fork down slowly. "Adrian, don't." Sharp. Something new in his voice that I hadn't heard before. A quality of certainty, the absolute certainty of someone who believes they are seeing through a deception. "I see how you look at each other when I say something. The way you check in. I'm not a patient in a hospital. I'm a person in my own house." "We know you are," I said carefully. "Then stop treating me like something's about to break." He looked at me. His eyes were very bright. "I'm not broken. I'm different. There's a difference." "You're right," I said. "There is a difference, and we're trying to understand it." "You're trying to manage it," he said. "That's not the same as understanding it." He wasn't entirely wrong. That was the terrible part. He was seeing something real. We were managing, we were monitoring, we were calibrating everything we said and did around the question of his stability. And in a healthier mind, those observations would have led to a productive conversation. But his mind was not moving through a healthy landscape anymore. and the observations were being filtered through something that was starting to distort them. He pushed back from the table. He took his plate to the sink. He left the room. Daniel and I sat at the table. "He's not wrong," Daniel said quietly. "I know," I said. We've been so careful with him that maybe we've stopped just being with him." "That's not fair," I said. "We're doing what we have to do." "I know." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I know. I'm not saying we're wrong. I'm just saying he's not wrong either. We were both right. We were both failing." That's the particular hell of a situation like ours. Everyone can be doing their best, and it can still not be enough. It can still be going in the wrong direction. There's no one to blame when that happens, and the absence of a villain is in some ways harder to survive than the presence of one, because at least a villain is something you can fight. What do you do with a sickness? What do you do with neurons and chemistry and the specific bad luck of inherited biology? You can't argue with it. You can't punish it. You can't ask it to please respect your family and the life you've built and the boy you love. It doesn't listen. It was never listening. That fall, Adrian had the first episode that required us to call Dr. Crane outside of regular hours. It was a Saturday night. Daniel was away. A weekend visit to his father in Santa Fe. A trip we'd planned for months, the first time he'd left overnight in over a year. I was home alone with Adrian. We'd had a quiet evening. He'd painted for a few hours. We'd eaten dinner. He'd seemed genuinely okay. At 2 a.m, I woke to noise from downstairs, not violent noise, more like the sound of movement, of things being shifted. I came downstairs to find Adrian in the kitchen, all the lights on, every cabinet opened. He was standing in the middle of the room in his pajamas, looking at the open cabinets with an expression that was entirely intent, as if he was reading something in the arrangement of dishes and glasses and cans of soup. "Adrian!" He turned around. He looked at me, and for just a fraction of a second that I replay still, that I will replay for the rest of my life, I wasn't sure he knew who I was. Then it passed. His eyes cleared. "Mom, what are you doing, baby?" He looked at the cabinets, back at me. He stopped. I was looking for something." "What were you looking for?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know." He said it with a kind of exhausted bewilderment, like someone who has just woken up in the wrong place. "I don't know. I thought I heard something, and then I was down here." I crossed the kitchen and put my hands on his face. He was sweating slightly. His eyes were moving in the small, quick way that meant something inside was going too fast. "Come sit down, I said. We sat at the table, the same table where we'd had every important conversation of the last 2 years, and I kept my hand on his, and I talked to him quietly about nothing, about the weather, about the peach tree, about Daniel's trip, just talking, just filling the space with something familiar and low, while he slowly came back to himself, the way a fever comes down gradually and unevenly. "Was I sleepwalking?" he asked finally. "Maybe," I said. I didn't tell him what his face had looked like. "Are you feeling more like yourself now?" "I think so." He looked at his hands. "I scared you." "A little. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, just tell me. And has this happened before, at night, things like this?" He was quiet for too long. "Adrian, a few times he said. I thought they were dreams, or almost dreams. I didn't think." He stopped. "I should have told Dr. Crane." "Yes," I said. "You should have." "I know." He looked at me. I was afraid of what it meant. "I know," I said. "I'm afraid too, but being afraid of the answer doesn't make the question go away. It just means we're alone with it instead of having help." He nodded. He was exhausted. I could see it in every line of him, the weight of the medication and the disrupted night and whatever had pulled him downstairs. I made him chamomile tea he didn't want and walked him back upstairs and sat outside his door until I heard his breathing even out. Then I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring, even at that hour. "Elena, what's wrong?" I told him, quietly, sitting on the floor in the hallway outside our son's room, my back against the wall. I told my husband what had happened. He was quiet through it all. I could hear him breathing on the other end. "I'm coming home," he said. "It's 2 in the morning. You're 3 hours away." "I'm coming home," he said again. And there was nothing in his voice that invited discussion, and I didn't discuss it. "Keep the phone near you. I'll be there by 5. He was. He came through the door at 5:15 with his overnight bag still in his hand, went straight upstairs and looked in on Adrian, sleeping, finally, deeply, and then came back down and sat beside me on the couch and put his arms around me without a word. We sat like that until the sun came up. There's a thing that happens to a marriage under sustained pressure. Some marriages crack under it. Some marriages are ground down to a fine powder by it, each partner slowly becoming unrecognizable to the other. What happened to ours, and I want to say this clearly because it matters, because it is the part of the story that is not tragedy. What happened to ours was that it got very quiet and very solid, like wood that has been in water and dried, harder than it started, denser, heavier, more real. We stopped talking about easy things. We stopped talking about nothing because we didn't have nothing anymore. Every conversation was weighted. Every evening was a debrief. We checked in with each other in the gaps between Adrian's needs, quick and honest exchanges that had none of the cushioning of normal marital conversation and all of the intimacy. How are you really? That question asked seriously becomes a different question than it sounds. It becomes, are you still here? Are you still you? Can we keep doing this? The answer was always yes. Not always a comfortable yes, not always a sure yes, but yes. Daniel started going to a support group for parents of children with mental illness. He found it through Dr. Crane's referrals, a Thursday evening group that met at a community center across town. He came home from the first one quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet, looser somehow. The specific looseness of someone who has heard their own pain named in someone else's voice and felt, for the first time, not alone. There's a woman there, he told me. Her son is 32. She's been doing this for over a decade. And she said, he stopped, looked at the ceiling for a second. She said, you don't survive this by being strong. You survive it by being stubborn. I thought about that for a long time. Stubborn, not strong. Strong implies an internal resource that never depletes. Stubborn just means you refuse to stop. It doesn't say anything about how you feel while you're refusing. It doesn't require you to be unafraid or unbent. It just requires the refusal. I decided I could be stubborn, even on the days when strength felt like a word from someone else's story. By the time Adrian turned 19, the trajectory had changed enough that Dr. Crane called us in for a conversation she had been building toward for some time. She sat across from us in her office with the legal pad and the clicking pen, and this time her expression was different, still composed. But underneath the composure there was something careful that meant, what I'm about to say is going to land hard, and I need you to hear it anyway. Adrian's condition is progressing, she said. The episodes are becoming more frequent and more complex. The current medication protocol is managing some symptoms but not adequately. I want to talk about a higher level of care. Daniel was very still beside me. Hospitalization? I asked. Not yet, but I want to add an intensive outpatient program, daily structured support, group therapy, psychiatric monitoring that's more frequent than twice a week. And I want to have an honest conversation about the medications. The current combination is not sufficient. There are other options. Some of them involve trade-offs I want to prepare you for. What kind of trade-offs? Daniel asked. She told us. I won't go through all of it, the clinical language, the list of potential effects and interactions. But the core of it was this. The medications that might more effectively address what was happening in Adrian's mind came with the possibility of dulling other things. His clarity, his quickness, his particular way of being in the world, and there was no way to know in advance what the balance would look like. It was, like so much of medicine, a managed gamble. He's an adult, Dr. Crane said. He'll make his own choices about treatment with our guidance, but I want you both to understand what we're potentially facing." "He's 19, Daniel said. "He's technically an adult." "Yes, but is he capable of making can he make fully informed, Daniel?" I put my hand on his arm. He stopped. "He is still our son," I said. "And yes, he is capable of making his own choices. He has always been capable, even now. Maybe especially now." I looked at Dr. Crane. "What does Adrian want?" She paused. "He wants to try the new protocol," she said. "He told me." She glanced at her notes, though I think she remembered this without looking. "He told me I don't want to disappear, but I also can't keep living inside the noise. I want to try." I closed my eyes for just a moment. I don't want to disappear. My son, 19 years old, sitting in a psychiatrist's office and fighting, in the way only he knew how to fight, methodically, thoughtfully, even now, even through all of it, fighting for himself. "Then we try," I said. The new protocol began in November. The intensive outpatient program meant that for 6 weeks, Adrian was gone from the house every morning and came back every afternoon, which was strange in the particular way that the absence of someone you're afraid for is strange. You don't know if the quiet is peace or premonition. I worked my shifts at the clinic. Daniel ran his practice. We called each other in the late afternoons before Adrian got home, just to hear each other's voice. Just to check in with that serious question, "Are you still here?" "Yes." "Still here." The new medications hit Adrian hard in the first 2 weeks. He was nauseated, tired in a way that was different from the cotton-head tiredness of before, heavier and more physical. He lost weight. He spent his evenings mostly on the couch, which was so unlike him. This boy who had always been in motion, always building, always researching, always filling notebooks, that the sight of him horizontal and still felt like its own kind of loss. But he didn't stop painting. Even on the worst evenings, even when he'd eaten nothing and his hands were unsteady, he painted. Small canvases propped on the coffee table, sometimes just a few strokes. But he did it. He showed up to it the way he showed up to Dr. Crane's office, with that determined, methodical commitment that was the most Adrian thing about him, the thing that illness had not taken. One evening, I came home from a late shift to find him asleep on the couch, his arm hanging off the edge, a small canvas on the floor where it had slipped from his hand. I picked it up. I stood there in the lamplight looking at it. It was mostly black, with a narrow band of gold running through the middle, not a clean line, jagged and uncertain, the way lightning looks when it's very far away. I stood there for a long time. Then I set it carefully on the table, pulled the blanket over his shoulders, and went to stand at the kitchen window looking at the dark backyard. The peach tree that had given us exactly one season of fruit, and then, for reasons of its own, decided it was finished. I didn't feel hopeful that night. I want to be honest about that. I felt like someone who has been walking for a very long time in a direction they chose because there was no other direction, and who is no longer sure the ground ahead is solid, but who keeps walking anyway because stopping is not a thing they know how to do. That's not a beautiful feeling. It doesn't make for an inspiring moment. It's just what it was. I kept walking. We all did. The 6th week of the intensive program, something shifted. Adrian came home on a Thursday. I remember it was Thursday because Daniel's support group met that night, so he wasn't home yet. And when Adrian walked through the door, his face was different. Not healed, not fixed, but different in the specific way of someone who has put down something very heavy, even if only for a moment, even if they'll have to pick it back up tomorrow. "Good day?" I asked. He dropped his bag by the door, something he never did. He always hung it on the hook, the small lapse of his usual exactness, and sat down at the kitchen table and said, "There's a guy in the group. His name is Raymond. He's 41. He's had schizophrenia since he was 22. I sat down across from him, and Adrian paused. "He's okay, like genuinely okay. He has an apartment. He has a job he likes. He does bookkeeping, actually, which is kind of funny. He has a cat named Ptolemy." The ghost of something crossed his face. He told me today that the first 10 years were the hardest because he kept trying to get back to who he was before. And then one day he realized there was no back, there was only forward. And forward turned out to be not what he expected, but livable. I waited. He wasn't done. He said the disease took things from him, real things he mourned, but it also made him, the way he put it was, it made me build a self I had to really construct because I couldn't coast on the automatic version anymore. Adrian looked at me. I thought about that all day. What did you think? I thought. He stopped. Started again. I've been so angry at all of it, at my brain for not working in the way I needed it to, at the medications, at the health, at the situation. And I think the anger made sense. But I think I've been so angry at what I lost that I haven't figured out what I'm building instead. The kitchen was very quiet. I don't know what that looks like yet, so he said. I don't know what the forward version of me is, but I think, he swallowed, I think it might include the painting, because that's the one thing that doesn't feel like loss. It feels like something new. I didn't trust my voice for a moment, so I sat with him in the quiet, at the kitchen table, where we'd had every important conversation, in the house we'd built, in the life that looked so different now from what we'd imagined and was still stubbornly ours. Tell me about Ptolemy, I said finally, the cat. Adrian blinked. Then he almost smiled, that almost smile, the one I'd been collecting for years. Raymond says he's deeply judgmental and refuses to sit anywhere except on the bookkeeping records. Sounds like a cat with opinions. Yeah. The almost smile held for another second. Yeah, he does. When Daniel came home that night, I told him what Adrian had said. He stood in the kitchen doorway listening, still in his coat, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he's going to find his way. I think so, yeah, I said. I know so, he said, and the certainty in his voice wasn't naive. It wasn't the certainty of someone who didn't understand the odds. It was the certainty of someone who knew his son, who had watched him construct himself out of the available materials under conditions that would have broken less determined people, who understood that the word stubborn applied to Adrian Hayes as much as it applied to any of us, maybe more. The month that followed was the closest thing to equilibrium we had experienced in years. The new medication was settling. The outpatient program was winding down with the recommendation that Adrian continue weekly group sessions. He was painting every evening. Daniel had started photographing the canvases and keeping them in a folder without mentioning why. Adrian turned 20 in February. We made the chili, his father's mother's recipe, too spicy as always, and Adrian ate 2 bowls, and we didn't talk about anything heavy, and it was the best evening we'd had in what felt like a very long time. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the turning point. Maybe we are finally on the other side of the worst of it. I thought that. And then March came. End of part 2. Part 3 lưu ý, viết 5.500 đến 6.000 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Phá hối thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kết cấu leo thang liên tục, không dừng ở một cú sốc duy nhất, mỗi đoạn lại tăng mức độ xung đột. Đây là kiểu escalation storytelling để giữ người xem ở lại. Nhân vật phân cực rất rõ, thông điệp đạo đức mạnh. Truyện không chỉ kể drama mà còn đẩy ra bài học. Tình yêu không thể mua bằng tiền, phải đặt ranh giới với gia đình độc hại. Người lớn tuổi có quyền bảo vệ tài sản và phẩm giá, nên nó mang màu của moral lesson story. Liên tục có cliffhanger mini. Ngôi kể thứ nhất rất cảm xúc. Nhân vật tôi kể lại toàn bộ trải nghiệm theo kiểu thú nhận hồi tưởng rất gần với người nghe. Mục tiêu là kéo khán giả nhập vai vào nỗi đau và sự phản bội. Giữ đồ kịch tính, không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI. cố gắng nghe sáng. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả quá mượt mà và hoàn hảo. Kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong một tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chỉ dẫn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show More 1507, Part 3. The night everything broke. March came the way bad things often do. Not with warning, not with the courtesy of a signal you can read and prepare for, but sideways, quietly, through a door you thought you had already secured. The first week was ordinary. Adrian had a good session with Dr. Crane on Monday. He painted 2 new pieces on Tuesday and Wednesday, larger than usual, more color than his typical dense darks, something almost hopeful in the palette. He and Daniel watched a documentary together on Thursday evening, some nature thing about deep ocean creatures, and I heard them talking about it afterward, Adrian correcting something the narrator had gotten slightly wrong about bioluminescence, Daniel arguing good-naturedly that he was probably misremembering, Adrian going to find a book to prove it. Normal. So normal it made me want to press my face against the glass of it and stay there. Friday was the day the notebooks changed. I didn't know that then. I found out later, piecing it together the way you piece together the moments before a car accident in reverse, looking for the thing you missed. On Friday afternoon, Adrian spent 4 hours in his room. When he came down for dinner, he was quiet in the specific way that had a texture to it, a density, the quiet that was not peace. I noted it. I made a mental note to watch. Saturday passed. Sunday passed. By Monday of the second week, I had convinced myself I was being oversensitive, reading threat into what was just variation, the ordinary ebb and flow of a condition that was never going to be linear. And then Tuesday, I was at work, a full shift at the clinic, one of those days where the waiting room doesn't empty, where you move from room to room on the kind of muscle memory that keeps you functional even when your brain is somewhere else. My phone buzzed at 2:17 in the afternoon. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail because I was mid-conversation with a parent about a fever protocol. It buzzed again immediately. I excused myself. Elena. His voice had that quality, the one I'd learned to recognize, the careful control over something that needed to be controlled very carefully. You need to come home. What happened? He's okay. Adrian is okay, but you need to come home. I was in my car in 4 minutes. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and my mind doing the thing it always did in these moments. The catastrophic inventory. What? How bad can we manage this? What do we do? Running through possibilities the way you flip through a card file, fast and mechanical, looking for the one that fits. I pulled into the driveway and Daniel was on the porch. He looked like someone who had been shaken hard and was still finding his footing. His shirt was untucked. There was a red mark on his left forearm, not a wound, more like a friction burn, the kind you get when something or someone grabs you. I looked at the mark. I looked at his face. Tell me. He came downstairs around noon, Daniel said. His voice was steady, but it cost him. I was working at the kitchen table. He came in and he was agitated, more than I've seen in a long time. He said the notebooks had been moved. Moved? I hadn't touched them. Nobody had. But he was certain. He said someone had been in his room. He said, Daniel stopped, pressed his lips together. He said we were documenting him for a report. He said we'd been working with Dr. Crane to have him removed. The words went through me like cold water. I tried to calm him down, Daniel continued. I told him nobody had touched his things, that we weren't working against him, that we just wanted to help. And he was so far gone, Eleanor. He wasn't, I could see it in his eyes, he wasn't really hearing me. He was hearing something else, and then he grabbed my arm. He held up the arm with the mark. He grabbed me and he said, "Yeah, tell me the truth right now." And I kept saying, "Adrian, I love you, listen to me." And a pause, a long one. He pushed me hard into the counter and then he stopped, just stopped, like he'd hit a wall. He let go of my arm and he looked at me, and I don't know what he saw, but it scared him, whatever it was. He went very still and then he said, "I don't know what's happening to me." And he sat down on the kitchen floor. Where is he now? Upstairs. I called Dr. Crane. She wants us to bring him in today, not Thursday, today. She said depending on how he presents, we may need to talk about inpatient. I sat down on the porch step, not from weakness. I just needed a moment to let this settle, to let it become real inside me before I went in and had to be whatever Adrian needed me to be. He hurt you, I said. He grabbed me, he pushed me, he didn't. Daniel, he hurt you. He sat down beside me. He didn't know what he was doing. I know that. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. We sat there for a moment in the thin March sunlight. The peach tree was budding. It did that every spring. Made this gesture toward life and then mostly thought better of it. "I'm scared," Daniel said. And this undid something in me, because Daniel did not say that easily. Daniel had been the stable one, the he's going to be fine one, the let's be rational about this one. And hearing those words from him in that voice meant we had crossed some line that we had both been pretending for a long time we would never have to cross. "I know," I said. "Me too." I went inside. I went upstairs. I knocked on Adrian's door. "It's me," I said. A long pause, then the door opened. He looked terrible, not in the way of someone who has been violent, in the way of someone who has been terrified. His face was grey. His eyes were red at the rims. He had been crying, which in 20 years of knowing him I could count on one hand the number of times I had seen him do. "Is Dad okay?" he asked. His voice was raw. "He's okay." I hurt him. "He's okay, Adrian. I hurt him." The emphasis was not an argument. It was a sentence he was giving himself, a fact he was driving into himself like a nail. I grabbed him. I pushed him. He put his hand over his mouth for a moment. I knew it was him. Somewhere I knew it was him. But there was this layer of something, this thing that was telling me that he stopped. I couldn't. He stopped again. "Come here," I said. He came into the hallway and I put my arms around him, my 20-year-old son, taller than me by almost a foot, and I held him the way I had held him when he was small and frightened, which was the only thing I knew how to do right then. He stood there and let me for a moment, just a moment, then he pulled back. "I need help," he said, very plainly, very directly. "I need more help than I'm getting. I know that now." "I know," I said. "Dr. Crane wants to see you today." "Okay." "She might recommend, Adrian, she might think you need a hospital," he said. No drama, no resistance. Yeah, I figured. I looked at my son, this person I had made and raised and watched and fought for and been terrified for and been astonished by and loved in every season of the word. I looked at him and I tried to find the right thing to say and found nothing, and then said the only true thing I had. "You are not lost. Do you hear me? Whatever this is, whatever comes next, you are not lost." He looked at me for a long time. "I'm trying to believe that," he said. "I know. Keep trying." Dr. Crane's office that afternoon was the longest 2 hours of my life to that point. She assessed Adrian thoroughly, spoke to him alone, then spoke to all three of us together. She was direct in the way that only works when there is real trust built up underneath it. We had been in that office many times. We had earned the directness, and she knew we could hold it. "What happened today is a significant escalation," she said. "The delusional thinking, the fixed belief that you were working against him despite all evidence to the contrary, that represents a shift. The physical aspect, even limited as it was, tells me that Adrian's ability to manage the internal experience is being overwhelmed." "So inpatient," Daniel said. "I want to recommend a voluntary admission to Crestwood Psychiatric." It's a facility I work with closely. They have an excellent program for young adults, and the level of monitoring and support they can offer is something we simply can't replicate in outpatient settings. She looked at Adrian. You've been fighting hard for a long time. There's no weakness in needing a stronger level of support. This is like needing surgery after medication stops working. It's not a failure, it's medicine. Adrian was looking at the plant on her windowsill, a large fern that she'd had as long as we'd been coming there. He nodded slowly without looking at her. How long? Initially 30 days. We reassess at 30. Can I paint there? She almost smiled. Yes, they have an art therapy program. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Daniel, looked at him directly the way he rarely did anymore, the unguarded way. I'm sorry about today, Dad, he said. I'm really sorry. Daniel held his son's gaze without flinching. I know you are, he said, and I love you, and we're going to get you the help you need. Crestwood was not what I had imagined. I had imagined something institutional and cold. White walls, fluorescent lights, the specific dehumanizing quality of places that process people in crisis. What it was quieter than that. Older building, well maintained, gardens visible from the common room windows. Staff that spoke to Adrian directly, not around him, not with that slightly raised, slightly simplified language people use with those they've decided cannot fully understand them. They spoke to him like an adult, which was the thing he needed most, and which, I realized standing there, had been increasingly difficult for Daniel and me to do, not from malice, but from fear. We had been treating him more and more like something breakable, and he had known it, and it had been its own kind of damage. He was admitted on a Wednesday. We helped him settle his room, small but private, a window that looked over the garden. He'd brought 3 things: his current notebook, a book on the history of color in painting, and the small photograph from his nightstand, the 3 of us at the kitchen table from a birthday maybe 3 years ago. All of us mid-laugh at something Daniel had said, the gold light warm and uncomplicated. He stood the photograph up on the windowsill. I stood in the doorway watching him arrange these things. 3 objects, carefully placed, like he was constructing something to hold on to. And I felt the specific grief of a mother leaving her child somewhere that is necessary and still wrong. Not wrong in the sense of a mistake, wrong in the sense of this should not have to be. The distance between what you wish for your child and what they are actually living is always present in parenting, but usually it's small enough to step over. Sometimes it's the size of a room you have to leave them in. We'll be here on Saturday, I said. Visiting hours start at 10. He nodded. He was looking out the window at the garden. Adrian, he turned. I'm proud of you, I said, for choosing this, for asking for more help. It takes a lot. He looked at me with those dark eyes that had always been watching more than they let on. Don't cry until you're in the car, he said. I wasn't going to cry. Mom, I pressed my lips together. Drive safe, he said. And that small reversal, him telling me to be careful, the reflex of care pointing outward, even in that moment, that was the thing that got me. That was the thing I managed to hold together until I reached the parking lot. I cried in the car. Daniel drove. He put his hand on mine and didn't say anything, and that was exactly right. The 30 days at Crestwood were the strangest month of our lives. Strange in the way that absence is strange. The house was so quiet without Adrian in it, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, that has an edge to it. We ate dinner together and spoke about ordinary things, and it felt like practice for a play neither of us wanted to be in. We slept better, which was its own complicated guilt. You should not feel more rested when your sick child is being cared for by someone else, and yet the body doesn't negotiate with should. We visited on Saturdays and Wednesdays. The visits were, I don't have a clean word for what they were, hard, good, sometimes both at the same time in ways that were difficult to separate. Adrian was on an adjusted medication regimen under close monitoring, which in the first 2 weeks made him slow and tired in ways that were difficult to watch. But his psychiatrist at Crestwood, a Dr. Warren, careful and unhurried, was optimistic about the trajectory. He's engaging seriously with the therapy, Dr. Warren told us at the 2-week check-in. The group work in particular. He has strong insight into his condition, which is actually a significant asset. A lot of patients spend years in denial. Adrian walked in already understanding what was happening to him. We're building on that. The painting? I asked. Every day, he's been given extra canvas time by the art therapy staff because he uses the sessions well. Dr. Warren paused. Some of what he's producing is quite remarkable, Mrs. Hayes. I want you to know that. I came home from that meeting and stood in his room, something I hadn't let myself do in the days after he left. I'd kept the door closed, a small superstition, and looked at the paintings still hung there, dozen of them by now, covering 2 walls. All of that interior weather made visible. I stood in his room for a long time. Then I called Daniel, who was at the office, and I said, "He's going to get through this." And Daniel said, "He is. I know he is." We believed it, not as a comfort, as a fact. It was the first time in months I'd been able to say something like that and feel its truth, rather than just its necessity. 30 days became 35 when Dr. Warren wanted an additional week of monitoring on the new medication stabilization. Adrian called us to tell us himself, which he hadn't done the last time a plan had changed. He'd let us hear it through Dr. Crane. And the fact of him initiating, of him owning the information and choosing to communicate it directly, was its own small sign. "Another week," he said on the phone. "They want to be sure the levels are stable before outpatient." "Okay," I said. "How do you feel about that?" A pause. "Honestly, a little relieved. I don't totally feel ready yet. I didn't want to say that if they were going to send me home. But since they're not," he stopped. "I'm not ready yet." "That's okay," I said. "That's more than okay. That's honest." "Mom," his voice shifted. "I've been thinking. When I come home, things need to be different. I need more structure than we had. I've been reading about it, about how home environment affects. Adrian, we'll figure it out together. Don't plan the whole thing from a hospital room." "I'm serious." "I know you are. We'll talk when you're home." All 3 of us. He came home on a Thursday. Saturdays and Wednesdays for visiting, and now a Thursday for returning. The days were all acquiring weight. Thinner than he'd gone in, but with something settled in his face that hadn't been there before. Not peace exactly, more like someone who has survived the worst part of something and knows it, and is still here, and has decided to work with that. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his bag and looked around at the ordinary, unchanged room and said, "It smells the same." "It always smells the same, as Daniel said. Your mother insists on the same dish soap since 2009. "It's a good dish soap," I said. Adrian set his bag down. He stood the photograph, the one from his windowsill at Crestwood, the 3 of us mid-laugh, on the kitchen counter, like a flag in new territory. "Okay," he said. "I'm home." The weeks that followed were careful, structured, as Adrian had said he needed, regular schedules, clear expectations, ongoing outpatient appointments 3 times a week. Dr. Warren had coordinated with Dr. Crane for continuity of care, and the 2 of them were in contact with each other in ways that made the system feel, for the first time, like a system, like something that might actually hold. Adrian was not the same person who had left. I want to say that plainly, without drama, because it matters. The particular sharpness that had always been his most defining quality, that knife-edge quickness. The 3 steps ahead brain, it was duller now, not gone, but duller. Whether that was the illness or the medication or both, I couldn't fully separate, and Dr. Crane told me it might always be impossible to fully separate. That was its own kind of loss. But he was here. He was present in the room in a way he hadn't been for over a year. He came to dinner and he stayed in the conversation, and he made the dry, precise jokes that were his. He painted every evening. He had started at Crestwood, doing larger pieces, more ambitious in structure, and this continued at home. The corner of his room was crowded with canvases in various stages, some finished, some abandoned. One enormous one he'd been working on for 2 weeks that he wouldn't let us see yet. One evening, Daniel came home from work and said quietly, while Adrian was upstairs, "I got an email today." Something in his voice. "From who?" A gallery art, he said. I sent some photos of Adrian's work a few weeks ago without telling you. I wanted to see. I emailed photos of about 8 pieces to a gallery downtown, the one on Copper Avenue. Daniel, they want to see the actual work, Wayne, he said. They said they'd be interested in talking about a show. The kitchen went very quiet. You didn't tell me you were doing this, I said. I know, I should have. He paused. I didn't want to make it into something and then have it be nothing, but it's not nothing. He doesn't know either. No, I wanted to ask you first. We looked at each other across the kitchen. This could be... I started again. He's fragile right now. If we build this up and it doesn't... Or, Daniel said carefully, it could be exactly what he needs. Something that's his, something that has nothing to do with the illness, something that says, you made this and it matters and the world outside this house knows it. I thought of Adrian at the kitchen table years ago, talking about black holes and slow time, about the shapes in his vision he'd been tracking in notebooks, about the gold line on a black canvas, jagged as far-off lightning. It feels like something new. Ask him, I said finally. Tell him what you did and ask him. Daniel did. That evening after dinner, he told Adrian about the email, about the gallery, about the photographs he'd taken and sent, without asking. Adrian listened without expression. When Daniel finished, there was a long silence. You went through my paintings, Adrian said, flat. I photographed them. From the doorway, I didn't touch them, without asking me. Yes, Daniel said, no deflection. Without asking you, I should have. I'm telling you now because you deserve to know, and because the gallery's response deserves an answer, and that answer is yours to give. Adrian looked at his father for a long moment. I watched from the kitchen doorway, unable to make myself leave. You did it because you believed in them, Adrian said finally. Not a question. I did it because I believed in you, Daniel said. Big difference. Another silence. Adrian looked down at his hands. He had paint under his fingernails, cadmium yellow and a dark violet, the evidence of the large canvas he'd been working on upstairs. What did they say? He asked. Exactly. Daniel pulled up the email on his phone and handed it across. Adrian read it again, set the phone down on the table. I need to think about it, he said. Of course, and Daniel said, I'm not saying no, I just need to think. Take all the time you need. Adrian nodded. He got up. He went back upstairs, and 20 minutes later, through the ceiling, we heard the sounds of him working. The soft drag of a brush, the click of a jar lid, the particular quiet industry of someone who has gone back to the thing they do when they need to process something in the only language that works. Daniel looked at me. I looked at him. Was that okay? He asked. Meaning the email, meaning all of it. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I think so. I think so. Those 3 words had become our operating currency. Not certainty, not hope exactly, but the small, honest territory between them. I think so. It was enough. It had to be. We were 3 weeks past Adrian's return from Crestwood, when the stability we had been so carefully constructing began to develop again, the pressure change I had learned to fear more than any specific incident, not drama, not a crisis moment I could point to, just the pressure change, the quality of the air in the house shifting in ways I could feel before I could name. Adrian was sleeping poorly again. He didn't say so, but I knew the signs. The light under his door at 2, 3 in the morning, the heaviness behind his eyes at breakfast. He was still painting, still attending appointments, still performing all the structure we'd built. But there was something working against it, something underground. I mentioned it to Dr. Crane. She saw him for an extra session that week and came out of it with a measured expression that I'd learned to read. He's having intrusive thoughts again, she said. He's managing them. He's using the tools we've worked on. But the thoughts are more frequent and more intense than they were at discharge. We're watching. We were always watching. We had been watching for years. The watching was its own kind of exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of doing, but the exhaustion of perpetual vigilance. of keeping some part of yourself always on alert. The morning of the day, everything broke. I woke up at 6:15 and lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the house. It was the 9th of March. The light through the curtains was thin and grey. Daniel was still asleep beside me, his breathing slow and even. The house was quiet, too quiet in a way that had a specific texture, the absence of something I couldn't identify. I got up, I went to Adrian's door, I knocked. Adrian? Nothing. I opened the door. His room was empty, bed unmade, the way it would be if he'd gotten up in the night and not come back. The large canvas, the one he'd been working on for 2 weeks, the one he wouldn't let us see, was turned to face the wall. I don't know why that detail hit me the way it did, just that it did. I went downstairs. He was in the backyard, standing in the middle of the yard in his pajamas and a coat he'd grabbed off the hook by the door, barefoot on the cold ground, looking at the peach tree, just looking at it. I watched him from the back door for a moment. His posture was, I don't have a better word than wrong. Not violent, not agitated. Wrong in the way of a radio that's almost tuned to the right frequency and isn't quite. I put on my own coat and went outside. Adrian. He didn't startle. He'd heard me coming. He said without turning, "It's going to fruit this year." I looked at the peach tree. The early buds were there, same as always. The same gesture it made every spring before mostly giving up. "Maybe," and I said. "No, it will, he said, still not turning. "I know it will." There was something about the certainty, the particular inflection. I stood beside him and I looked at his face in profile. His father's jaw, my eyes, the face I had watched change over 20 years. And what I saw there made my chest go very tight. He was somewhere else, not fully, not the way he had been when he'd pushed Daniel, not the full removal. But he was only partially here, and the part of him that wasn't here was very far away. "How long have you been out here?" I asked. "I don't know." He said it without concern, which was its own kind of alarm. "A while. Since I woke up and I needed to be outside." He paused. There was noise. What kind of noise? Inside kind. He tapped his temple once. Too loud. I thought outside would be quieter. "Is it?" He considered this seriously. "Some." He turned and looked at me finally. His eyes were tired and very intent, that combination that meant he was working hard to hold on to something. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "Okay," I said. My voice was very steady. I was proud of that later. "The thoughts are bad," he said. I'm not going to hurt anyone. I need you to know that. I'm not going to hurt Dad or you or myself. I know the difference right now. But they're bad. They're saying things that aren't." He stopped. "They're saying things I know aren't true, but they're very loud and very convincing, and I'm tired of arguing with them. We need to call Dr. Crane," I said. "I know. Right now. I know, Mom." He turned back to the tree. "I just wanted to stand here for a minute first. I wanted to be outside where it's real. The tree is real. The cold is real. You're real." He paused. "I'm trying to remember what real feels like." I stood beside my son in the cold March garden, barefoot on the frost-stiff ground, and I did not say the things that rose up in me. The grief, the rage at this thing that was taking him in pieces, the ancient helpless love that had nowhere to go. I stood beside him and I watched the peach tree's budding branches move in the slight wind, and I let him have his minute. Then I said, "Okay, come inside. We'll call her together." He came. We called Dr. Crane answered on the second ring, and she asked to speak with Adrian directly, and I handed him the phone and went to wake Daniel, who sat up immediately. The practiced alertness of someone who has learned to be ready, I told him. He got up, came downstairs, stood in the kitchen doorway looking at our son, sitting at the table, speaking quietly into the phone, his paint-stained hands flat on the table, that same gesture of pressing down. And Daniel looked at me and I looked at him, and nothing passed between us that required words. Dr. Crane's recommendation came at the end of a 30-minute call. This time, not voluntary admittance. This time, crisis intervention. Crestwood had a crisis stabilization unit separate from their residential program, and Dr. Crane wanted Adrian assessed there today, immediately, before anything escalated further. "Adrian," I said when he handed back the phone, "Dr. Crane wants us to take you to Crestwood." He closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I heard her. Is that okay?" He opened his eyes. He looked at the kitchen, at the familiar mess of it, the countertop still lacking new tiles, the photograph on the counter, the three of us mid-laugh, frozen in that uncomplicated light. "No," he said honestly, "it's not okay, but it's what needs to happen." He stood up. "Let me get my shoes." He went upstairs. Daniel and I stood in the kitchen. Daniel looked like a man trying to hold a dam with his hands. "She said crisis stabilization, huh?" He said, "Yes. That's different from before. That's more serious." "Yes," I said again. He turned toward the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to me and his hands pressed flat on the counter. The same gesture as Adrian, the same reaching for something solid. And then he turned back. "Okay," he said, "just okay. Not I'm scared. Not is he going to be all right. Just okay," because there was no other available word, because okay was where you lived when everything else had been stripped away, when the only thing left was the refusal to stop. Adrian came back downstairs in his shoes and a clean shirt. He had changed his shirt, which gutted me somehow, this act of ordinary dignity in the middle of a crisis. He had taken the time to put on a clean shirt and his jacket and his current notebook, which he held tucked under his arm. He stood at the kitchen door. "I'm going to be okay," he said. And then, before either of us could respond, "I know you don't know that. I know you can't know that, but I need to say it anyway." "Say it as many times as you need to," Daniel said. We drove. I sat in the back with Adrian. He looked out the window the whole way, at the city moving past in the flat grey March light, the gas stations and strip malls, and the distant mountains going in and out of cloud. He held his notebook in his lap with both hands. At one point, without preamble, he said, "I want to show the paintings to the gallery. Tell Dad. Tell him yes." "Tell him yourself," I said. "I will. I just wanted to say it now, in case I—" He stopped, started differently. "I just wanted to say it now." "Okay," I said. "I heard you." We pulled into Crestwood, the familiar building, the garden beyond the windows, the staff at reception who recognized us by now. This was not the first time, it would not be the last. We had become known here in the way you become known, at a place that has had to hold something precious for you. Daniel spoke to the intake nurse. I stood with Adrian in the lobby. He looked around the space, at the art on the walls, prints, nothing significant, but chosen with care, the kind of art you put in a place where people are in pain, and you want to remind them the world contains things worth returning to. "You know what's weird?" he said. "What?" "This feels not safe exactly, but known. Like I know the shape of what happens here." He glanced at me. "Is that awful, that a psychiatric facility feels known to me?" "No," I said. "It means you've been doing the work long enough that the help is familiar. That's not awful, that's just survival." He thought about that. He nodded slowly. "Survival," he said, like he was testing the weight of the word. And then Daniel came back from reception, and a nurse came through the secured door, and it was time. Adrian went through the door, and it closed behind him. Daniel and I stood in the lobby, outside, through the window, the garden, the early spring trees beginning to suggest leaves they hadn't grown yet. I thought about what he'd said in the backyard that morning. I'm trying to remember what real feels like. I thought about the photograph on the kitchen counter, three of us mid-laugh in gold light. I thought about the painting he turned toward the wall, the one he hadn't let us see. I had no idea what was on it. I didn't know yet what he'd been working toward all those evenings. I would find out. Not that day, not for a while, but I would find out that day. Daniel and I drove home through the grey March morning, and we made coffee neither of us particularly wanted, and we sat at the kitchen table, and we did not talk about the thing we were both afraid to say, which was, This is getting worse, not better, and we don't know where the floor is. We didn't say it. We drank the coffee. We held each other's hands across the table. The house was quiet. The kitchen light was on. The photograph of us laughing stood on the counter like something planted. Outside, through the kitchen window, the peach tree moved in the March wind. I looked at it for a long time. I had never believed it would fruit again. It had done it once, and then it had decided, or so I thought, that once was enough. But Adrian had stood in the frozen yard at dawn and said, "I know it will," with that terrible, certain voice that sometimes knew things and sometimes was lying to itself, and I had not been able to tell in that moment which kind of knowing it was. I still didn't know, but I looked at the tree, and for the first time in a very long time, I let myself wonder. End of part 3. Pat Bond lưu ý, viết 5.500 đến 6.000 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột. Không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kết cấu leo thang liên tục, không dừng ở một cú sốc duy nhất. Mỗi đoạn lại tăng mức độ xung đột. Đây là kiểu escalation storytelling để giữ người xem ở lại. Nhân vật phân cực rất rõ, thông điệp đạo đức mạnh. Truyện không chỉ kể drama mà còn đẩy ra bài học. Tình yêu không thể mua bằng tiền, phải đặt ranh giới với gia đình độc hại. Người lớn tuổi có quyền bảo vệ tài sản và phẩm giá. Nên nó mang màu của moral lesson story. Liên tục có cliffhanger mini. Môi kể thứ nhất rất cảm xúc. Nhân vật tôi kể lại toàn bộ trải nghiệm theo kiểu thú nhận hồi tưởng, rất gần với người nghe. Mục tiêu là kéo khán giả nhập vai vào nỗi đau và sự phản bội. Giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Việt như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI, cố gắng nghe sáng. Có yếu tố con người, cả miêu tả quả mướt mà và hoàn hảo. Kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong một tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chỉ dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép, hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 1516 Part 4. What remains when everything else is gone? The peach tree did not fruit that spring. I want to say it did. I want to give you that small mercy. The sick boy's prediction coming true. Nature cooperating with the story we needed. But it didn't. It budded, as always. It made its annual gesture. And then a late frost came through in the second week of April and took the blossoms before they had a chance to become anything. And I stood at the kitchen window looking at the bare branches and felt something I didn't have a precise word for. Not quite grief. More like confirmation of something I had been trying not to know. Adrian was still at Crestwood when the frost came. The crisis stabilization had extended into a longer residential stay, 45 days this time, longer than the first. The medication requiring more careful calibration under the new circumstances. We visited. We called. The visits were different from the first stay, heavier in some ways and lighter in others. Heavier because this was the second time. Because the word stabilization had started to feel like something you reached for and almost touched and then had to reach for again. Lighter because we knew the place now, knew the staff, knew the rhythms, and familiarity is its own small mercy, even when what's familiar is hard. Dr. Warren said Adrian was making progress. He always said that, and I had learned to listen for what came after it. The texture of the butt that was sometimes present and sometimes not. This time, there was a but. The new medication was managing the acute phase more effectively, but the cognitive effects were significant. Adrian was slower, more deliberate. The quicksilver quality that had always been the signature of his intelligence, the 3 steps ahead processing, the rapid connections, was dulled to something more methodical. He knew it. He told us in a visit during the 3rd week, sitting across from us in the family room with the garden windows behind him, looking at his own hands the way he'd been doing a lot lately, like they belonged to someone he was still getting acquainted with. I feel like I'm thinking in a different language, and he said, like everything is translated. It gets there, but there's a delay, and something gets lost in the translation. The doctors think it will improve as your system adjusts, Daniel said. Maybe. He didn't say it dismissively, just honestly. Or maybe this is the new baseline. Dr. Warren was honest about that. There might be a ceiling now that's lower than the old ceiling. He looked up. I'm trying to figure out how to be okay with that. Are you? I asked. Not yet, he said, but I'm working on it. That was the hardest thing about loving Adrian. The particular courage of him was never the dramatic kind, never the cinematic rallying speech. It was this. I'm not okay yet, but I'm working on it. Day after day, in the face of something that kept changing the terms of the deal, he kept working on it. I don't know where that came from. Maybe the stubbornness my mother had told me about, the Cruz family trait that ran alongside the darker inheritance. Maybe just him. His specific construction, his refusal to accept that there was no forward version of himself worth building. He came home 47 days after we'd driven him there in the grey March morning. It was May, warm and gold, the peach tree bare of promise, but green and alive. He walked through the front door and stood in the hallway and just breathed for a moment. What's for dinner? He asked. Whatever you want, Daniel said. Chilly. It's 72 degrees outside. I know what I want, Dad. Daniel made the chili, too spicy as always. Adrian ate a full bowl for the first time in months and didn't complain about anything. And we sat at the table in the warm May evening, and I thought, this is good. This specific moment is good. I am going to put it somewhere safe inside me and keep it. I kept it. I still have it. I return to it sometimes. The way you return to a place you love when you need to remember what love feels like when it isn't weighted down by everything that came after. Because what came after was the thing I have not yet told you, the thing I have been building toward in the way that stories build toward their heaviest moments. Not because I want to deliver it, but because it is part of what is true, and I made a promise to myself when I started telling this, that I would tell it true. What came after was July, 4 months after the March crisis, 7 weeks after Adrian came home from his second stay at Crestwood, the summer he turned 21, which we had celebrated quietly. Dinner, no fuss, Adrian's request. He didn't want the weight of a celebration when he was still finding his footing. Daniel had been having headaches. I want to say that again slowly. The way I should have said it to myself when it was happening, the way I should have forced it to become real, instead of letting it live at the edge of my attention where I could almost ignore it. Daniel had been having headaches for about 6 weeks. Started in May. He'd mentioned it once, casually, the way he mentioned everything that was about himself, which was with the specific minimization of a man who had learned to put his own discomfort at the bottom of the priority list because there was always something more urgent. I was a nurse. I knew better. And I let myself be convinced by the same things he used to convince me. Stress, tension, long hours, not enough water, not enough sleep. He was 47 years old and under sustained pressure, and he worked too many hours. Headaches made sense. He saw his doctor in early June under pressure from me. His doctor said tension headaches, prescribed something for stress management, told him to reduce caffeine. He reduced caffeine. The headaches didn't reduce. I told him to go back. He said he would. He didn't, not immediately, because Adrian had a difficult week in mid-June. A relapse of paranoid ideation that required an emergency session with Dr. Crane and 2 days of close monitoring at home. And Daniel put himself back on the bottom of the priority list, and I let him, because the thing in front of us was Adrian, and you can only see so many things at once. That is something I will carry for the rest of my life, the letting him. On the 17th of July, Daniel woke up and said his vision was blurred. I got us to the emergency room in 20 minutes. They admitted him immediately. The MRI was done within the hour, and the neurologist, young, careful with his face in the way that means he has learned to control what it shows, because what it shows matters enormously in that room, sat across from us and said the word that ends one part of a life and begins another. Glioblastoma, a brain tumor. Aggressive grade. Present for estimated, based on size and growth patterns, possibly 6 to 9 months, though these were educated estimates, not certainties, and in this disease, nothing was certain except that it moved fast. I am a nurse. I knew what glioblastoma meant before he finished the sentence. I knew the numbers, EEGs, the survival rates, the timelines, the geography of what we were walking into. I knew it all. And knowing it did absolutely nothing to cushion the impact of hearing it said out loud about my husband, sitting in a room with fluorescent lights and a box of tissues on the table, and Daniel's hand in mine going very still. Daniel said, "How long?" The neurologist said, with treatment, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, median survival is 12 to 15 months. Some patients exceed that significantly. Some do not reach it. Daniel said, "Elena," just that, my name, like he was checking that I was still there, like the room had gotten very large and very empty, and he needed to locate me in it. "I'm here," I said. He turned to look at me. He looked at me for a long time, and then he said the most Daniel thing, the most exactly Daniel thing he could have said in that moment. "We need to figure out how to tell Adrian." Not, "I'm scared." Not, "This isn't fair." His first thought was Adrian. After 20 years of marriage to this man, after all the Tuesdays, all the steady reliability, all the small acts of love that didn't announce themselves, I should not have been surprised. I wasn't surprised. I was gutted by it in the specific way you are gutted by proof of something you already knew. We told Adrian that evening, together at the kitchen table, always the kitchen table, the site of every hard truth this family had ever spoken. Adrian listened without interrupting, which was not always his way, and when Daniel finished, he was very quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" Daniel looked at his son. Something passed across his face that I don't have a word for. "Just be here," he said. "Be in the house. Be okay enough to be in the house." Adrian nodded. "I can do that," he said. And the steadiness in his voice, the effort it cost him, the deliberate hold on himself, was one of the bravest things I ever witnessed. What followed was the chapter I will not describe in full, because some things resist being made into story. Some things you live through and they become permanently internal. Not something you tell, but something you carry, a weight that shapes how you move through every room for the rest of your life. What I will tell you is the structure of it, the bones. Daniel had surgery in August. The surgeon removed as much of the tumor as was safely possible. He came home diminished in specific ways. His left hand slightly unreliable, his fatigue significant, his headache still present but different in character now. He started radiation. He started chemotherapy, which he described once privately to me as feeling like your body has decided to have a very strong argument with itself. He lost weight, he lost his hair, which he was surprisingly philosophical about. "I was losing it anyway," he said, and he was slightly, and we both almost laughed. He kept going to work for as long as he could. His employees, the two people he'd hired over the years, Sandra and Pete, who had been with him long enough to feel like family, managed the overflow. He went in 3 mornings a week in September, 2 in October, then stopped in November, when the fatigue made it impossible to pretend. Adrian was extraordinary in this period in ways I did not expect and could not have predicted. The fragility I had been so carefully managing around, the eggshell vigilance, the constant monitoring of the air pressure in the house, had to be set aside because there was no more setting aside. And Adrian rose to meet it. Not without his own struggles. He had 2 difficult weeks in September when the combined weight of his father's illness and the ongoing management of his own mind was clearly overwhelming. and Dr. Crane extended his sessions to twice a week without being asked. But he showed up for his father in ways that were very quiet and very real, sitting with him during the hours when Daniel was too tired to do anything but be horizontal, bringing him things without making a production of it, talking to him about everything and nothing the way Daniel used to talk to him. One afternoon I came home from a grocery run to find them in the living room. Daniel was stretched out on the couch with his eyes closed. Adrian was in the chair beside him with a book, not reading it, just sitting, just being there, not performing care, just providing company to someone who needed not to be alone. I stood in the hallway for a long time before either of them heard me come in. In December, Daniel told me he wanted to talk about Adrian's future. We were in our bedroom. Late evening, Daniel propped on pillows because lying flat had become uncomfortable. The lamp was on. It was cold outside, the first real cold of the season, and the window glass was dark. If something happens to me, and he said, Daniel, Elena, not harsh, patient, please, I need to say this and I need you to listen. I sat on the edge of the bed. I made myself still. If something happens to me, and he said again, I need to know you won't try to manage Adrian's situation alone. I need you to promise me you'll ask for help from his care team, from the support groups, from whoever. I need you to promise you won't try to hold everything by yourself. I always ask for help, Glenn, I said. You ask for help for Adrian, he said. You don't ask for help for yourself. Those are different things. Promise me. I looked at my husband, his face familiar in every line and angle after 23 years, thinner now. The structure of the bone more visible, more present, as if the essential shape of him was becoming clearer as other things receded. He was looking at me with that expression. Direct, serious, no softening. And I understood that this was not a request. This was a thing he needed to leave behind him that would still function after he was gone. A piece of infrastructure he was building for me. I promise, Owen, I said. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm proud of him, you know. I know you know. But I want to say it. I'm so proud of him. He knows, I said. Tell him again anyway. Tell him more than you think is necessary. You can't overtell someone that you're proud of them. I reached over and took his hand. His fingers closed around mine with the familiar pressure, the same pressure that had been there for 23 years, that I had slept beside and woken up next to and reached for across kitchen tables and car consoles and all the ordinary geography of a shared life. I love you, he said. I love you, I said. We stayed like that in the lamplight, while the winter dark pressed against the window. Daniel died on the 14th of February. I tell you the date not for the irony of it, though yes, it is there, February 14th, a date the world has decided belongs to love, but because dates matter. They are the pins that hold the map in place. Without them, everything slides. He died at home, which was what he had wanted. Hospice had been in place for 3 weeks. He had been mostly sleeping for the last 10 days, surfacing sometimes to recognize us, to hold our hands, to say things that were sometimes clear and sometimes not. In his last coherent days, he told Daniel, had told Adrian very clearly, on a morning when he was more present than he had been in a week, paint the big one, the one on the wall, finish it. Adrian had stared at him. How do you know about that one? Daniel had almost smiled. I'm your father, he said. He said, I know everything. And then, finish it, okay? It matters. On the 14th, at 4:17 in the morning, with me on one side of him and Adrian on the other, Daniel Hayes stopped breathing, quietly, without struggle, the way he had lived, without making more noise than necessary, without demanding the room, just steadily present, and then, with the same lack of drama, gone. The silence that followed was the largest silence I have ever been inside. I sat with it for, I don't know how long, long enough. Adrian sat across the bed, very still, looking at his father's face, not crying, not speaking, just present in the way he had been in that living room chair, performing no emotion, just being in the same room with the thing that had happened. After a while, he looked up at me. "What do we do now?" he asked. I had been asking myself that question since the neurologist's office in July. What do we do now? What do we do now that the thing we feared has happened, and we are still here, and the calendar has not stopped, and the kitchen still exists, and the peach tree will bud again in a few weeks without asking our permission? We call the hospice nurse, I said, and we take it 1 hour at a time. Okay, he said. And something in the simplicity of it, his willingness to take that small instruction, to trust me with the next step, even in the middle of the largest thing, something in that broke me in a way the death itself hadn't, because the death was enormous and formless, but this was specific and human, and the size of a moment I could actually hold. I cried then. Adrian came around the bed and sat beside me and put his arm around my shoulders and held me while I cried. And it was awkward and slightly stilted, the way Adrian's physical comfort always was. He had never been naturally fluid with it. It had always required a beat of conscious decision. But he did it. He stayed. He held on. We buried Daniel on a Thursday. Small service, the way he would have wanted. Family, his 2 employees, the Thursday support group he'd attended for years and whose members came as a quiet group and stood at the back and did not need to introduce themselves. Dr. Crane came. My mother flew in from New Mexico, older now, smaller, standing at the edge of the grave with her hands clasped and her face doing the private arithmetic of loss. Adrian stood beside me through all of it. He was medicated, stabilized, present. He said 3 sentences at the service. He had written them on a small piece of paper, and he read them, which was unlike him, but which I understood, because even with the best of himself, he could not trust the moment to hold. And what he said was, "My father believed in me before I believed in myself." He took photographs of my paintings without asking and sent them to a gallery because he thought they were good. He was right about most things. He was right about that. People cried. I cried. Even Sandra, who had always been professionally composed, cried. Afterward, standing in the cold cemetery, while people came and went with their condolences and their casseroles and their carefully chosen words, my mother came and stood beside me and said nothing for a long time. Then she said quietly in Spanish, "He was a good man." "Yes," I said, "you will be okay." "I know," I said, and then, "I don't know that yet, but I know I will eventually." She put her hand on mine. "Same thing," she said. The weeks after Daniel's death had a quality I cannot fully render in language. Grief is not linear. Everyone says this, and it is true, but the truer thing is that grief is not even a single thing. It is multiple simultaneous states that have no business coexisting, but do anyway. I was devastated and functional. I was unable to eat properly and capable of going to work. I cried in the car and I answered emails and I made dinner and I missed him at every meal and I kept his coffee cup in the cabinet where he always kept it, and I moved through the house with this phantom sense of his presence in every room. And Adrian was my urgent concern through all of it, not because I doubted him. He had been extraordinary through Daniel's illness, beyond what anyone could have reasonably asked, but because I knew from everything Dr. Crane had told us over the years that acute loss was a significant risk factor for destabilization. Grief is destabilizing for anyone. For Adrian, grief had the potential to become the trigger that unraveled the stability he'd worked so hard to build. I watched. I monitored, quietly, without making it visible, because he had been right years ago when he said we treated him like something about to break. I tried to find the balance between vigilance and trust, and I was not always successful. Some days I pitched too far toward watching, and he called me on it gently but directly. "Mom, I can see you doing it. I'm okay. I'm sad. That's different." "I know it is," I said. "Do you? Because the way you looked at me just now, I'm learning," I said. "I'm still learning." He accepted that it was the truth, and he had always had a specific respect for the truth, even when it wasn't comfortable. He was sad. He was genuinely, deeply sad in ways he expressed to Dr. Crane that he relayed to me in pieces. Not everything, Not all of it. He had a right to his privacy, even in grief, but pieces. He told me once, about 2 months after Daniel died, that the hardest part was not the big moments, not the anniversary dates, not the birthday, not Father's Day, which I had dreaded and which turned out to be survivable. The hardest part, he said, was the reflex, the automatic impulse to tell his father something, to show him something, and then the arrival of the wall where that impulse had always found an opening. I painted something last week, he said, and my first thought was, I need to show Dad, and then he stopped, and then, I know, I said, does that stop eventually? I thought about it honestly. I think the reflex slows down, as I said. I don't know if it stops entirely, but the impact of hitting the wall, and I think that gets softer, not because you miss them less, just because you get stronger. He nodded. He filed it somewhere. He went back to painting. The gallery on Copper Avenue had been patient. When Adrian had said in the car on the way to Crestwood in March, tell Dad yes, that yes had been relayed, and the gallery had waited through the hospitalization and Daniel's illness and Daniel's death with a grace I hadn't expected from a commercial establishment. The director, a woman named Clara Webb, had sent a handwritten condolence note when Daniel died. She said to take whatever time was needed. She said the offer stood. 4 months after the funeral, Adrian brought it up himself. We were at dinner. He had been quiet through most of the meal, not the heavy quiet, the thinking quiet, which I had learned to distinguish. He set down his fork. He said, I want to do the show. I looked up. Clara Webb is, he said, the gallery. I want to do it. Okay, I said, tell me what you need. I need to finish the big one. He meant the painting on his wall, the one Daniel had told him to finish. He had been working on it since January, months before Daniel died, and since then he had not touched it. I need to finish it, and I need it to be in the show. Okay? And I need you to not make a big deal about it. He said, I'll try. Mom, I will genuinely try. I said, that's the best I've got. He almost smiled. He finished the painting in October, 7 months after Daniel died, on a Tuesday evening when I was in the kitchen and the house was quiet. He called down the stairs in a voice I hadn't heard from him in a very long time. Loose, almost light. The voice of someone who has put down something heavy. Mom, come up. I went up. He'd turned it to face the room. I stood in the doorway of his bedroom and looked at it for a long time without speaking. It was large. He'd built the canvas himself, 4 feet by 5, which I hadn't known he'd done, which was the kind of thing he managed without asking because he knew I'd worry about the cost. The background was that deep, dense darkness that had always been his language, the dark that wasn't empty but full, layered with color buried underneath that you had to look for. But across the center of it, in a diagonal that went from the lower left corner to the upper right, there was a figure, not representational, not a portrait, more like the suggestion of a person, the impression left by a person made of gold and amber, and a particular orange-red that I had not seen him use before, warm and intense. And around this figure, filling the space between the figure and the dark, were shapes, hundreds of small shapes, some geometric, some organic, in every color, crowded and alive and pressing in from every edge. I looked at it for a very long time. What are the shapes? I asked finally. Everything the noise says, he said. He was standing beside me looking at it too. All the stuff that comes in, the thoughts, the hallucinations, all of it, I put them all in. And the figure, someone who's still standing in the middle of it, and he said, someone who, the shapes are real, they're all around him, but they're not him. He's still separate, still there. I pressed my lips together hard. It's Dad, I said, not a question, a pause. It's all of us, he said, but yeah, mostly it's Dad. There are moments that belong only to the person who lived them. I'm not going to describe what happened inside me standing in that doorway looking at that painting. Some things you carry privately for the rest of your life, and this was one of them. I will tell you only that when I turned to my son, I said, your father was right, it matters. And Adrian said very quietly, I know. The show was scheduled for March, exactly 1 year, almost to the week from the morning Adrian had stood barefoot in the frozen garden and told me the tree was going to fruit. I found that symmetry later, and I'm not sure what to do with it, except note it. The way you note things that feel like they mean something without being able to say precisely what. In the months between October and March, things changed in the house in ways that were slow and mostly quiet. The grief didn't leave, Amaz. It doesn't leave. It becomes architectural, part of the structure you live inside. But it became something I could build around. I went back to full-time hours at the clinic. I attended the support group that Daniel had gone to for years, sitting in the same community center, looking at the same bad coffee setup, and finding in it the same thing Daniel had described the first time he went. The specific loosening that comes from hearing your own pain recognized in someone else's words. Adrian had his first significant relapse of the year in November. I want to tell you it didn't happen. It happened. 3 weeks of worsening symptoms, the paranoid ideation creeping back, the sleep disruption, one night that required me to call Dr. Crane at 2 in the morning and talk Adrian through 2 hours of extreme distress that neither of us fully described to each other afterward, by mutual unspoken agreement. The medication was adjusted, again, the endless calibration. He stabilized, again, the endless reaching for and almost touching solid ground. He did not go back to Crestwood. This was progress, Dr. Crane said. He had enough tools now and enough self-awareness and enough trust in the system around him that they could manage this at home with intensive support. Progress, she said. I held on to that word, the way you hold on to something in moving water. One Saturday afternoon in January, I was cleaning out Daniel's home office, a task I had been avoiding for 6 months. A task I finally did because avoiding it had become its own kind of weight. I was sorting through his desk when I found the folder. The photographs he'd taken of Adrian's paintings, printed out, all of them, every piece Adrian had made since he was 16, organized by date, labeled in Daniel's small, careful handwriting. 53 photographs. I sat on the office floor with that folder on my lap for a long time. 53. 4 years of work. Daniel had been documenting all of it, quietly, without making a production of it, without ever once saying, look what I've been keeping, because he believed in his son, and he wanted there to be a record, and he was the kind of man who did things because they were right, and not because anyone was watching. I put the folder on the shelf above the desk. I'm not sure why. It seemed important to leave it somewhere findable. February came. The anniversary of Daniel's death arrived and passed. Not gently, but survivably, which was the word I had adopted as my standard. Survivable. Lower bar than okay, more honest, more achievable. The day was survivable. Adrian and I ate chili for dinner, too spicy, and neither of us said much about why, and both of us knew. March came. The morning the gallery show opened, I got up early, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window looking at the peach tree, which was budding again. The same annual promise, the same gesture. Adrian came downstairs at 7, earlier than usual, in the particular alertness of someone who has not slept well, but is determined not to let it matter. He poured coffee. He stood beside me at the window. It's going to fruit this year, he said. I looked at him. I know I said that last year, he said, and I was wrong, but I think this year. What makes you think so? He considered. I don't know, he said. I just think so. We stood there in the March morning light, mother and son, in the kitchen of the house we'd built and half broken, and rebuilt in different dimensions with our coffee and our peach tree, and the absence of the man who had been the third point of everything we'd constructed. Are you ready for today? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Probably not, he said, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's the whole thing right there, I said. That's the entire thing. He looked at me. Something in his expression shifted, not the almost smile, something fuller than that, something that acknowledged the full weight of what I'd said and agreed with it. Yeah, he said, I think it is. I need to tell you something that I've been circling around for this entire part of the story, the thing that lives at the center of this period, the years after Daniel. The years of Adrian cycling through stability and relapse and the ongoing, grinding, unglamorous work of managing a serious illness while also being a person who has to live a life. What I learned in those years, not all at once, not cleanly, but in the slow accumulation of hard days that eventually add up to something, is that love is not enough. I want to be honest about this because the opposite is what we are told constantly by every story that wants to be comforting. Love is enough, love wins, love can fix everything if it's strong enough. And I love Daniel with everything I had, and I love Adrian with everything I have, and love did not fix this. It did not cure the tumor. It did not repair the misfiring neurons. It did not make the bad nights not happen. What love did, what it actually practically did, was make me stay. That's all. That's not a small thing. Staying is not a small thing, but it's important to be clear about what it is and what it isn't. Staying is not the same as fixing. Staying is not the same as saving. Staying is showing up tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, even when showing up changes nothing except that you're there. I stayed. Adrian stayed. Daniel stayed for as long as he had. And here's what I also learned, the harder thing, the one that took longer. Staying required setting boundaries that love alone did not teach me. I had to learn in those years after Daniel how to love Adrian fully and also protect myself. How to be his mother and also be a person with finite resources who needed to sleep and grieve and sometimes say, I cannot take this call tonight. I will call you in the morning. How to trust the professionals we'd built around him, Dr. Crane, Dr. Warren, the therapy team, rather than trying to be all of it myself. I had promised Daniel I would ask for help for myself, and I kept that promise imperfectly, the way you keep most promises. Not in one clean act, but in 100 small attempts, some of which succeed and some of which don't, and the aggregate of which is something you can call keeping. Daniel's support group became my support group. I sat in those chairs for years. I heard other people's stories, parents, spouses, siblings, children of people with serious mental illness. And I found in those stories the thing that sustained me when my own resources ran out, which they did regularly, because resources do. Nobody sustains at full capacity indefinitely. That is not weakness. That is physics. The gallery on the evening of the show was full. I stood in the back and watched people move through Adrian's work, these strangers who had no context for what they were seeing, no knowledge of the notebooks or the kitchen table conversations or the shapes in peripheral vision or Crestwood or Daniel's folder of 53 photographs. They just saw the paintings, the dense dark canvases with their buried color, the abstract figures pressing through the noise, the gold line that ran through everything like a current. I watched a woman stand in front of the large painting, the one that was mostly Dad. For a very long time, she didn't move. She just stood there looking at it. Eventually, she reached out and almost touched it, stopped herself, her hand an inch from the surface, and then pressed that hand to her own chest instead. She felt it. She had no idea what it was. She felt it anyway. Adrian was in the middle of the room talking to Clara Webb and a few other people who had gathered around him, and he was not okay, not in the simple sense. He was on medication that made him slightly slow, and he had not slept well, and there was an anxiety visible in the set of his shoulders that I could read from across the room. He was not okay, but he was there. He was standing in a room full of his own work, speaking about it to strangers, using his own name and his own voice and his own carefully constructed self to introduce these paintings to a world that had not yet decided what to make of them. He was there. I looked at my son in the middle of that room, and I felt the specific thing that I can only call the after-grief version of joy. Not uncomplicated, not clean, nothing like the simple happiness of the kitchen table with gold light and 2 spicy chili, and all 3 of us still whole. Something harder and more honest than that. something that knew exactly what it had cost to arrive at this moment and counted the cost precisely and still said, yes, this is worth it. Worth it is not the same as okay. I want to be very clear about that. Worth it is not a resolution. It's not a cure. It's not the end of the difficult thing. It's just the knowledge that the difficult thing has not been the only thing. That was what I held on to, standing at the back of that gallery in March. 1 year, almost to the day, from the morning Adrian had stood barefoot in the frozen garden, reaching for something real. I held on to it with both hands. The way you hold on to everything that matters in this life when you've learned what it costs to lose it. End of part 4. Part 5 lưu ý, viết 5.500 đến 6.000 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc, có quan điểm cá nhân, thông điệp, bài học, góc nhìn con người, melodrama nặng cảm xúc. Câu chữ thường đầy cảm xúc lên cao, bị xúc phạm, bị lợi dụng, bị phản bội rồi bừng tỉnh. Nhiều câu được viết để tạo cảm giác đòn đánh tinh thần mạnh. Kết cấu leo thang liên tục, không dừng ở một cú sốc duy nhất. Mỗi đoạn lại tăng mức độ xung đột. Đây là kiểu escalation storytelling để giữ người xem ở lại. Nhân vật phân cực rất rõ. Thông điệp đạo đức mạnh. Chuyện không chỉ kể drama mà còn đẩy ra bài học. Tình yêu không thể mua bằng tiền. Phải đặt ranh giới với gia đình độc hại. Người lớn tuổi có quyền bảo vệ tài sản và phẩm giá. Nên nó mang màu của moral lesson story. Liên tục có cliffhanger, mini. Ngôi kể thứ nhất rất cảm xúc. Nhân vật tôi kể lại toàn bộ trải nghiệm theo kiểu thú nhận hồi tưởng, rất gần với người nghe. Mục tiêu là kéo khán giả nhập vai vào nỗi đau và sự phản bội. Giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man. Nhân vật không hoàn hảo. Hội thoại tự nhiên. Tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Việc như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI, cố gắng nghe sáng. Có yếu tố con người, cấm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo. Phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện. Câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nháy sang document. Chi dần bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm cái mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show More 1521 Part 5. The Laugh That Remained. The peach tree fruited that summer. Not abundantly, not the extravagant branch-bending yield of a healthy, well-tended tree. Maybe a dozen peaches, small and slightly lopsided, growing in a cluster near the top where the sun hit longest. But they were real. They were there. I found them on a Tuesday morning in late July, standing in the backyard with my coffee. And I stood looking at them for so long that the coffee went cold. Adrian was right. He'd been right about the tree. I didn't tell him immediately. I stood there in the July heat and I held that small fact to myself for a few minutes, the way you hold something that belongs equally to grief and to something else you don't have a precise name for. Then I went inside and called up the stairs. Adrian, come look at something. He came down in his pajamas, coffeeless, squinting against the morning light. I pointed at the tree without speaking. He looked. He stood there looking at it for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Huh. You knew," I said. "I thought so." He paused. I wasn't sure if I actually knew or if I just needed to believe it. He was quiet for another beat. Sometimes those things feel the same from the inside. That sentence, I've carried it since. Sometimes those things feel the same from the inside. I have thought about it in the context of his illness, the way a delusion feels as real as a truth, the way the mind cannot always distinguish its own constructions from the actual world. But I have also thought about it in a wider sense, about the rest of us, the supposedly well ones, and how often we operate on belief. We have dressed up as knowledge on hope we have decided to call certainty, because the alternative is an honesty too cold to live inside. Adrian had believed in the tree. He had been wrong the first time. He had kept believing. And eventually, imperfectly, in the lopsided and insufficient way of most things that persist, the tree came through. I'm not going to force that into a metaphor. He would hate that. He has always been allergic to the kind of meaning-making that turns actual lived experience into a lesson with a bow on it. But I notice it. I can't help noticing it. Some things just are what they also mean. We picked the peaches on a Saturday and made a small, slightly too tart cobbler that we ate warm at the kitchen table. It wasn't the best thing either of us had ever eaten. We ate all of it anyway. The gallery show that had opened in March did not close after its scheduled 6 weeks. Clara Webb called in May to say the response had been significant enough that she wanted to extend the run, and would Adrian consider making 2 or 3 new pieces for an expanded exhibit in September. Adrian sat with the question for 3 days before he answered. He had learned slowly and imperfectly not to answer large questions from the first available emotion. And then he called Clara and said yes. This period, the 2 years that followed the gallery opening, was not the resolution of anything. I want to be clear about that because stories train us to expect resolution, the clean arrival at solid ground where the hard things are behind us and what's ahead is merely the ordinary. That's not what happened. What happened was something harder and more real. We found a life inside the difficulty, not beyond it, not after it, inside it. The way you find a way to breathe in a room with not quite enough air. Adrian still had bad months. He had a significant relapse in the autumn following the gallery opening. The worst episode since the March that Daniel was still alive to witness. And it required 2 weeks of crisis-level support from Dr. Crane's team and an adjustment to his medication that left him flat and slow for almost a month. He did not paint during those weeks. He did not paint, and the canvases sat in the corner of his room with their backs to the room, patient. And he sat on the couch and watched nature documentaries because they were the only thing that required nothing of him. And I brought him meals he ate half of and tried not to watch him too visibly, and called Dr. Crane every third day and went to my support group on Thursdays and kept going. Then, one evening in November, he turned the canvases around. He didn't say anything about it. He just went upstairs and turned them to face the room and started working. I saw the light under his door at 10, at 11, at midnight, and for once, for the first time, I didn't lie awake passing the quality of it, wondering if it was the good kind of restlessness or the bad kind. I just let the light be what it was. He'd learned something in that relapse, he told me later. He'd learned that the illness was not a temporary problem to be solved and dispatched. He'd been carrying, underneath all his acceptance language, underneath all the things he said to Dr. Crane and the group, and to me, a version of hope that was actually denial in a more sophisticated outfit. The hope that if he worked hard enough, managed carefully enough, stayed vigilant enough, the illness would eventually run out of territory to claim. That there would be a finish line. There isn't one, he said. We were having dinner weeks after the relapse, when he had enough distance from it to speak about it plainly. I think I knew that intellectually, but I was still waiting for it. Every time things were stable, I'd think, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe this is where we stay. And then it would move and I'd lose time to the feeling that I was back at zero. And now? I asked. He turned his fork over in his hand. A habit he'd had since childhood when he was thinking carefully. Now I think there's no zero. There's no finish line. There's just today and the tools I have today, and whether today is better or worse than yesterday. And if it's worse, that's information, not defeat. He set the fork down. It took me a long time to actually believe that. It takes everyone a long time, I said, for whatever it's worth. He looked at me. Does it apply to you too, or just me? The question landed more precisely than he maybe intended, because he was asking something real. whether I had also been waiting for a finish line, whether I had been living inside the difficulty while still, somewhere underneath the living, expecting to be delivered from it. I held his gaze. "Yes," I said, "it applies to me too." He nodded. He picked up his fork. "Okay," he said, "then we're both figuring it out." The September show was different from the March one. More people, more work, 12 pieces instead of 9, including 2 new ones he'd made through the summer. Clara had done more promotion this time, had written something in the gallery newsletter about Adrian's work that used words like visceral and unflinching and raw structural intelligence, which I read and thought were true and also insufficient. The words that are available for art are never quite equal to the thing they're describing, but they were the available words and people used them and people came. Something happened at the September show that I have not been able to fully account for in the years since, except to say that sometimes the world offers you something you weren't expecting, and the honest response is to simply take it without requiring an explanation. A man came to the show on the second Saturday. He was in his late 30s, I'd guess, with the kind of face that has been through things. Not dramatic things maybe, not the visible catastrophe kind, but the slow accumulated kind that shows up in the eyes and the set of the mouth. He stood in front of the large painting, the one with the figure made of gold and amber pressing through the dark, the one that was mostly Daniel, for a very long time, longer than anyone else had. Adrian saw him and went over. I watched from across the room. I couldn't hear what they said. What I saw was the man said something and Adrian listened. Adrian said something back. The man reached out and shook Adrian's hand and then, unexpectedly, didn't let go immediately. Held it for a moment, 2 hands instead of 1, the way you hold something you mean. Then he let go. He stood there for another minute looking at the painting. Then he left. I crossed to Adrian. "Who was that?" "His brother," Adrian said. He was still looking at the door the man had gone through. "He has a brother who... the same. Similar." He said he'd been trying to explain it to people for years. What it looks like from the outside, what it feels like to love someone who's inside it. He paused. He said the painting said it better than he could. I didn't say anything. "He thanked me, oh," Adrian said. Still that slightly distant quality, not illness distance. Something else. The particular distance of someone who has been seen in a way they weren't expecting and is still absorbing the impact. He thanked me for making it visible. I thought of Daniel in the family room at Crestwood, looking at the first painting and saying thank you for showing me. The same impulse at the beginning of everything now reflected back from a stranger years later. The painting traveling out into the world and doing the thing Daniel had recognized it could do, before the world knew, before the gallery show, before any of it. The thing of making the invisible visible, making the inside real enough for the outside to touch. "Your father would be..." I started. "I know," Adrian said, quick, not cutting me off exactly, but intercepting it. "I know." He looked at me, and in his face I saw both of them. Daniel's jaw, Daniel's fundamental decency, and also the specific thing that was purely Adrian, the quality that illness had tried and failed to fully extinguish, the exact particular gravity of him, the weight of a mind that had been asked to carry more than most minds are asked to carry, and had not collapsed under it, not entirely, not permanently. "I'm glad you made it," I said. "The painting." "Me too," he said. We stood together in the September gallery while strangers moved around us looking at what he'd made of everything we'd survived. It was enough. It was more than enough. The conversation about the therapeutic residence happened the following spring, when Adrian was 23. I want to tell you how it happened exactly, because the way it happened matters, not just what was decided, but how we arrived at it together, which is the only way anything hard should be arrived at. It started with an incident that was not as bad as some we'd had. He had a night. A bad one, the voices louder than they'd been in months, the paranoid thoughts more insistent. And he came to my bedroom door at 3 in the morning and knocked. I was awake before he knocked. I was always awake in some partial way, the vigilance of years. I opened the door. He stood there in the hallway and said, "I'm not safe to be alone right now." Let me tell you what that took. Let me tell you what it costs a person of Adrian's particular construction. The pride in self-knowledge, the fierce commitment to managing his own experience, the boy who had once decided to carry everything alone because he didn't want to break what we'd built. Let me tell you what it costs that person to stand in a hallway at 3 in the morning and say, "I am not safe to be alone right now." It cost everything, and he paid it. He came to me and he told the truth. We sat in the kitchen until 5 in the morning. I made tea. He didn't drink. We talked, not about the voices, not directly, but around them, the way you talk around a fire when it's too hot to face directly. By dawn, the acute phase had passed, and he was exhausted, and himself again, and we sat in the early light, and he said, "This can't keep working long term, the two of us managing this in a house alone." "I know," I said. "I need more support than you can give me, not because you're not." He stopped. "You're the best support I've ever had, but you're one person and you need to sleep. And I need a structure that doesn't depend on you being awake at 3 in the morning. There are residential programs," I said. I'd been looking into them quietly for months, the way I'd been doing things quietly since Daniel. "Not institutions, therapeutic residences. People with your kind of history living in supported communities, structured environment, staff on site, their own space." He was quiet. "I looked at once," I said, "about a month ago. Pinewood House, it's about 8 miles from here. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to push." "Tell me about it," he said. I told him. He asked questions, good, specific, practical questions, the Adrian way, about staffing ratios and medication management protocols and whether residents had private space for painting. I answered what I could and admitted what I didn't know. By the end he said, "Can we visit?" "Yes," I said. "Will you come?" "Of course." "Okay." He looked at the kitchen window, the backyard beyond it, the peach tree, bare in April. "I don't want to leave," he said. "I want to say that. I'm not. This isn't me being ready to leave. This is me trying to do the right thing for both of us." "I know," I said. "I know the difference." He looked at me. "Do you want me to go?" The question was not an accusation. It was genuine. He wanted the real answer, not the careful one. "I want you to be safe," I said. "I want you to have the support you need at 3 in the morning and at 3 in the afternoon and in every hour I can't fill. And I want to stop being afraid every time I leave the house." I paused. "That's not about wanting you gone. That's about loving you enough to be honest about what I can't give you." He sat with that for a long time. "Yeah," he said finally. "Okay." We visited Pinewood House on a Thursday. It was a converted Victorian house on a quiet street. Nothing institutional about it from the outside, which mattered more than I expected. There were 6 residents. The staff had the quality I had learned to look for in anyone who worked with Adrian. They spoke to him directly, not around him. They answered his specific questions without deflecting, and when he asked the one question I had been holding my breath about, "Do residents have space to paint?" The director, a woman named Hannah Foster, said, "We have a dedicated studio space shared among residents, and we try to schedule individual time based on each person's needs. Tell me about your practice." He told her. She listened. She asked follow-up questions. She did not treat it as a secondary concern, a hobby to be accommodated alongside the real work. She treated it as relevant information about who he was. On the drive home, he said, "She gets it." "Yes," I said. "The studio has north-facing light," he said. "North-facing is the best for painting. No direct sun, consistent light all day." "I didn't know that," I said. "Dad didn't know that either," and he said. I told him once and he said, "Makes sense." And I could tell he had no idea what I meant but was trying to be supportive. I laughed. The laugh surprised me, not the small polite kind, but the real kind from somewhere genuine, because that was Daniel exactly. The make sense that was love in the costume of comprehension. Adrian smiled. Not the almost smile, the actual one. He moved to Pinewood House in June. The move itself was simple in terms of logistics. His room was furnished. He needed mainly his clothes and his books and his painting supplies, which filled the back of my car and half the back seat. The simplicity of it was its own kind of grief. You raise a person for 23 years, and the portable version of their life fits in a mid-sized sedan. But his room had a window that faced the garden, and he stood the photograph. The three of us mid-laugh and gold kitchen light on the windowsill the same way he'd stood it on the windowsill at Crestwood years ago, like a flag, like a declaration that the space was now his. "I'll come for dinner on Sundays," he said when I was leaving, "if that's okay." "Every Sunday," I said. "I'll make whatever you want. Not chili in summer. You literally just had chili in summer last month." "I know. Mistake. Never again." He held the door of the room open with one hand, easy in the posture of someone who has made a decision and is living inside it. "Mom, yeah, thank you for everything, for staying when I would have understood if you didn't." I looked at my son, 23 years old, still thin, paint perpetually under his fingernails, standing in a room that wasn't our kitchen and wasn't Crestwood and wasn't anywhere that had been necessary, standing in a place that was for the first time chosen. "You never would have been okay with me leaving," I said. He thought about it. "No," he said, "probably not." So I shrugged. Easy decision. He almost argued with that. I could see it. And then he decided not to. "Drive safe," he said. I drove home. I walked into the house. The kitchen was quiet in the specific way of a house that has adjusted to a different number of people. A quiet that was not lonely exactly, but was aware of itself. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window looking at the peach tree, budding again, making its annual case for itself. I stood there for a while. Then I sat at the kitchen table and I called my mother and told her about the move. And she said it sounded like the right thing, and I said I believed it was. And we talked for an hour about things that had nothing to do with illness or grief or the long road, about her neighbor's ridiculous dog, about whether the tamale recipe needed more masa or less, about a movie she'd watched and liked and couldn't explain why. The conversation of people who are still here, still in the ordinary world, still making their way through Tuesdays. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet for a while. I thought about Daniel. I thought about the night he'd proposed, the tilting pasta and the jar sauce, and I want to do the boring stuff with you, the Tuesday stuff. And the fact that the Tuesday stuff was what I had left now, the Tuesday stuff, and the Sunday dinners and the phone calls to my mother, and how that had once seemed like not enough, and now seemed like the whole thing, the actual substance of a life rather than its scaffolding. I thought about what I had learned, not the lessons you extract for the purpose of making suffering meaningful. I am suspicious of that reflex, the way it can become a way of tidying up something that deserves to remain unruly. But the actual practical things I knew, now that I hadn't known when Adrian was 9, and telling us about black holes and slow time. I knew that you cannot save someone from their own biology. You can fight alongside them. You can build systems and structures and hold space and make the impossible calls at 3 a.m. and sit in the backyard at dawn while they try to remember what real feels like. But saving is not something one person does for another. The person has to save themselves, and what saving looks like is not dramatic. It looks like showing up to the appointment again, adjusting the medication again, turning the canvases back toward the room again after the weeks of turning them away. It looks like I'm not safe to be alone right now. Said at 3 a.m. to the person you trust with the truth. I knew that staying is a choice you make in every day separately, not once and then done. The people who tell you that love means you stay no matter what are not wrong, but they leave out the part where you have to choose it again and again and again, on the days when choosing it is the hardest thing you've done all week. You don't stay because it's easy. You don't stay because the story turns out the way you wanted. You stay because you've decided deliberately that this person is worth the cost of staying, and because on some fundamental level you understand that love is not a feeling you receive, it's a practice you perform daily in the specific, unglamorous, concrete choices of actual life. I knew that asking for help is not weakness. It is the most difficult form of courage available to people who have been raised to believe that managing alone is the same as being strong. I spent years confusing those two things. I spent years being strong in the ways that didn't serve me and failing to ask for help in the ways that might have. Daniel told me to ask for help for myself. I kept that promise badly, and then better, and then consistently. The support group, the therapy I started after Daniel died, the friends I had neglected for years and carefully, imperfectly rebuilt contact with, all of that was the help I learned to ask for. All of that was the structure that held me up while I held other things. And I knew this one took the longest. This one I am still learning. I knew that a life that looks nothing like what you planned is still a life. That survival is not a consolation prize. That the people who make it through the worst things are not diminished by having made it through. They are specific and real and shaped by what they've carried in ways that the untouched versions of themselves could never have been. I am not the woman I planned to be at 22, sitting across from Daniel in the library with his flannel shirt and his iron-on patch. I am not the woman I was at 33, standing at the kitchen table with my hands on Adrian's face saying, "You could never cost us anything we're not willing to pay." I am the woman who has paid every cost and is still paying and still here, which is not the version of myself I chose, but is the one I have, and she is, I have decided, firmly and not without effort, enough. The Sunday dinners became the rhythm of the years that followed. Adrian came every Sunday without fail, through the good months and the harder ones, through relapses that required us to adjust the logistics of the dinners, sometimes shorter, sometimes with Dr. Crane's team in closer contact than usual. But he came. He came and he ate and he talked. And some Sundays we talked about his paintings, and some Sundays we talked about nothing. And some Sundays we sat mostly in comfortable silence, and both of those things were fine. He continued showing at Clara's gallery. The third show, the one 2 years after the first, drew a reviewer from an arts publication who wrote about his work in terms that reached beyond the local scene. The review was generous and specific and used the phrase, "a painter," who seems to have mapped the territory between interior chaos and the human need for structure, and I cut it out and put it in the folder Daniel had made, the one with the 53 photographs, now considerably thicker. Adrian read the review once and then set it aside with the mildly satisfied expression of someone who has received accurate information. He did not frame it, he did not bring it up again, he went back to painting. He had a friend at Pinewood, a woman named Dara, also a painter, whose illness was different in character from his, but who understood in the fundamental way of people who live inside their own heads in difficult ways. They were not romantic. He was clear about this, she was clear about it. It was simply one of those friendships that grows in the specific conditions of shared understanding, the way certain plants only grow in certain soils. She came to the gallery shows. She was blunt about which pieces she thought worked and which ones didn't, and this was, he said, the most valuable thing she gave him. He had enough people who loved everything. He needed someone who would tell him the truth about the work. Marcus, his childhood friend, the one who had drifted away when the illness began to show, contacted Adrian 3 years after the first gallery show. A message through the gallery's contact page, which was either brave or oblivious and turned out to be both. He'd seen the review. He said he didn't know what to say, except that he'd thought about Adrian a lot over the years, and he was sorry for disappearing the way he had. Adrian told me about the message on a Sunday. He'd already responded. "What did you say?" I asked. I said he thought about it. I said I understood why he went. I said it was a hard thing to watch, and I didn't blame him for not knowing how to be around it. He paused. And I said I wasn't sure I had space in my life right now for the kind of relationship that would require me to explain a lot of history to someone who'd been absent for most of it, but that I appreciated him reaching out. "That's very generous," I said. "Is it?" He didn't say it sarcastically. He seemed genuinely uncertain. Or is it me letting him off too easily? I thought about it honestly. "I think," I said carefully, "it's you deciding how much energy you have and spending it accordingly, which is not the same as letting him off. It's you protecting yourself." He sat with that. "Dr. Crane says the same thing." "Dr. Crane has good judgment." "She does." He paused. "I still miss him, the version of him from before. That's the stupid part. I miss a friendship that probably doesn't exist anymore." "That's not stupid," I said. "That's just loss. They all feel the same from a distance." He looked at me. "You've gotten better at this." "At what?" "At saying the true thing instead of the comfortable thing." I thought about Daniel and the years of saying the comfortable thing when the true thing was what was needed. "I had a good teacher," I said. "He was very stubborn about honesty." Adrian smiled. Really smiled. The full one, the one I had learned not to take for granted, because it had been intermittent enough for long enough that every instance of it registered as something to hold. The house changed slowly in those years. I repainted the kitchen, a warm yellow that Daniel would have liked, and that Adrian said was too cheerful before admitting it looked good. I replaced the countertops. Finally, the ones we'd been meaning to replace for 15 years. The office where Daniel had worked became something halfway between a storage room and a library. His books still on the shelves. My nursing textbooks and the memoir collection I developed in the years of long waiting room hours. The folder of photographs and the growing stack of gallery materials filed together on the middle shelf. The peach tree fruited again the following summer, and the one after that. Not abundantly, not the way a tree with better care and better soil might. Always a modest yield, always slightly tart, always requiring more sugar in the cobbler than a better peach would need. But consistent, present, arriving each year without requiring anything of us except to notice. We noticed. I am 61 years old as I tell you this. Adrian is 34. He has been at Pinewood House for 11 years. He had a period at 28 when he tried transitioning to independent living, a small apartment near the house, and it lasted 8 months before a significant relapse made clear that the supported structure was genuinely necessary and not something he'd outgrown the need for. He moved back to Pinewood without the drama I might have expected from his younger self. He called me and said, "The apartment isn't the right thing right now," and that was almost all there was to it. The years had fouled the edges of the shame he used to feel about needing care. He understood now that needing care was not a statement about his worth. It was just a fact about his life, the same way needing glasses is a fact, or needing to avoid certain medications, or needing north-facing light. He paints every day. He has had 7 shows at Clara's Gallery over the years. A museum in Santa Fe acquired 2 pieces for their permanent collection. The large painting, the one that was mostly Daniel, is one of them. I drove up to see it installed. I stood in the museum room where it now lives, where it will live after both of us are gone, and I felt the thing I have no better word for than complete. Not resolved, not neatly tied. Complete in the sense of containing everything it needed to contain. The darkness and the figure pressing through it, the shapes of all the noise, the gold that runs like a current through the middle. Daniel would have stood in front of it for a very long time. He would have said, "It's incredible." And Adrian would have said, "Don't make it weird, Dad." I stood there long enough for both of them. There are things I wish had been different. I will not pretend otherwise, because pretending otherwise would be the most dishonest thing in a story I've tried to tell honestly. I wish Adrian had not inherited the thing he inherited. I wish Daniel had gone back to the doctor in May instead of June, or February instead of May. I wish I had pushed harder at the right moments and held back better at others. I wish I had known from the beginning that love is not rescue, so that I could have stopped spending years trying to turn one into the other. But wishing is just grief with a direction. And grief, I have found, is not a problem to solve. It's a landscape you learn to live inside. You don't cure it and you don't escape it. And eventually, if you do the work, you stop needing to. You learn the terrain. You find where the solid ground is. You know which areas are unstable and you navigate accordingly, and you keep moving because standing still is not a viable alternative. The last Sunday dinner I want to tell you about happened this past spring. Adrian came on a Sunday in April, and the peach tree was budding. Its annual gesture, its stubborn optimism, and we ate on the back porch because the weather was warm enough. The two of us at the small porch table with the kitchen behind us and the yard ahead. He'd been working on something new. He told me about it over dinner, not the painting itself, but the idea behind it, the starting point. He said he'd been thinking about time, about the way certain experiences don't follow linear time, the way they exist at multiple moments simultaneously. You're in the present and in the past at once. The thing that happened to you 20 years ago as present in your body as what happened this morning. Like black holes, I said. He looked at me. The slow time. I said. You told us about it when you were 9 at the kitchen table. You said if you fell in, time would slow for you and speed up for everyone else, and to them you'd disappear in a second. But for you, it would take forever. He was quiet for a moment. I said that? You did. Huh. He turned his fork over in his hand, the thinking habit, unchanged across 3 decades. I don't remember that. I do, I said. I remember it very clearly. He looked at me and then at the yard, at the peach tree with its early buds, at the late afternoon light coming in at a slant across the grass. To them you disappear in a second, he repeated, slowly, like he was feeling at the edges of it. But for you, it would take forever. Yeah, I said. That's kind of what it's been like, he said. The whole thing, from the inside. He paused. But we didn't disappear, did we? To the outside. No, I said, we're still here. He sat with that for a while. The afternoon light moved. The tree moved in the slight warm wind. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a lawnmower started and ran for a while and stopped. The ordinary sound of the world continuing, which it does, which it always does, with or without your readiness for it. I'm glad we're still here, he said, simply, without performance. Me too, I said. I'm very glad. We finished dinner. We did the dishes together the way we always had, him washing, me drying, the one domestic division of labor that had never been argued about in this household, not once. He put on music, something instrumental, a little melancholy, which was his preference and had been since he was 17, and we moved around the kitchen in the way of people who have been doing something together long enough that it requires no coordination. When the dishes were done, he dried his hands and stood at the kitchen window looking at the peach tree in the last of the daylight. Next time I come, he said, I want to see the folder. What folder? The one Dad made, the photographs. He didn't turn around. I've known about it for a while. Sandra, from Dad's office, she mentioned it once years ago. I wasn't ready before. I think I'm ready. I looked at the back of his head, at his shoulders, at the paint under his fingernails even now. Cadmium and a dark blue, evidence of the morning's work. Okay, I said. Next Sunday. He turned around. He looked at the kitchen, at the yellow walls and the replaced countertops and the photograph, still on the counter, the 3 of us mid-laugh in the gold light that had been there before everything and was still here after. It's a good kitchen, Halsey, he said. Your father picked the table, I said. I know, he told me. He reached for his jacket from the hook by the door, Daniel's hook, still his hook, the thing we had never moved. He was proud of it, the table. He said it was solid enough for anything. He put on his jacket. He looked at me with those dark, familiar, particular eyes. The eyes that had watched black holes and tracked the shapes at the edges of vision, and studied the faces of strangers looking at his paintings, and seen their own reflection in the brush strokes. See you next Sunday, he said. Next Sunday, I said. He went out. I heard his car start in the driveway, heard it back out. Heard it drive away down the street until the sound faded into the general hum of the neighborhood. The kitchen was quiet, the light was going. I stood at the window for a while, looking at the peach tree in the almost dark, the buds just visible, the annual gesture, the stubborn returning. I didn't know yet if it would fruit. It might. It probably would. At this point, after all these years of watching it, I had learned to hold both possibilities, fruiting and not fruiting, with the same quality of attention. To not need it to come through in order to value the attempt, that, I thought, was maybe the thing. The whole long lesson of the whole long road. You don't wait for certainty to commit to the trying. You try anyway, knowing it might not work, knowing the tree might not fruit, knowing the tile might not set, knowing the medication might need adjusting again, knowing the 3 in the morning might come again, knowing the loss is real, and the road is long, and the floor you find today might not be the floor you stand on tomorrow. You try anyway, because you are still here, because they are still here, because the kitchen table is solid enough for anything, and the light comes through the window every morning without asking your permission, and somewhere in a museum in Santa Fe, there is a painting on a wall that will outlast all of us that says, "We were here, we were in the middle of something enormous, and we did not look away, we did not look away, and we are still here, Matand." For everyone who has ever loved someone through something that doesn't have a cure, for everyone who has stayed, you know what it costs. You know it's worth it. That's the whole thing.